like
camera.
Blaze migraine by the way he's rubbing his forehead.
So we're still waiting for the camera.
And everybody wonders how we get bald like this, eh, Blaze? Rubbing our foreheads like this.
We're good to go. We're live.
Great, welcome. And welcome to the regular board meeting for the May, got too many windows open here, May 13th, 2020, in the not so regular format. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, and even, I believe, we may even be on other territories wherever we are in the region. The first item on the agenda, sorry, I'm just waiting for this spinning circle to go away. Sorry, my Prime Gov was having a little bit of a nap. All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, but we do need to, no edits necessary now. I will be just moving a couple of items around just for better process flow during the meeting, and I'll note that after the approval of the agenda if there's no additions or changes. Ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Director Sebring and Director Yanni DiNardo. Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed, motion carries. Moving on to the adoption of the minutes, we do have one correction to make in the minutes this evening. Resolution 183.12 PID was incorrect on DVP 19H02. And what's the correct PID?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The correct PID is 003-034-002.
All right, so that would be the only correction to the minutes. With that correction, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on those? None? All those in favor? Any opposed? Opposed, motion carried. I believe that takes us down to public input. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 items for public input period today. The first is a joint submission from Diane Allen, Brenda Dawn, and Donna Einerson regarding agenda item D1, which is the delegation, to present a report on the Joint Utilities Board Sewage Effluent Outfall Relocation Project. The job is owned by Duncan and North Cowichan with non-voting members from areas D and E and Cowichan tribes. The presentation is short, but the information behind this project totals 1,383 pages of reading for the Stage 2 environment impact studies. How many of you have fully read these studies? Other communities, for example, Cobble Hill, Arbutus Ridge, etc., use treated wastewater for irrigation through a purple pipe system. To counter potential pollution and damage to the sensitive satellite channel, and with a budget of $25 million to $40 million, has a purple pipe system been considered for North Cowichan and parts of the CVRD. The purple pipe system was pioneered in and is used extensively in the southern United States due to their lack of water for agriculture, parks, and golf courses. During our dry summers, our farmers cannot draw water from the Cowichan River at great cost to them. San Diego, California has been looking into another method of treating water, indirect potable reuse, or IPR, to achieve a sustainable water supply and for protection against drought, but we don't know if they or any other city have implemented it. There are so many places in the world where there's shortage of water, and here we are pouring it back into the ocean. The JUB treats the water to a very high classification. Why not use the water for our use in agriculture and golf courses? The engineering is there to transport the water by pipe to an ocean outfall, so instead of doing that, we pipe the treated water to where it is needed, and if necessary, store it in reservoirs ready to be drawn down for firefighting or return to the Cowichan and Cook-Sila rivers to help the salmon runs. This would also save tampering with the ocean bottom to lay pipes. Have the engineers developed a way to review and sample the water in a consistent manner at several points along its journey, and also to make the reports known to the public? We look forward at some point to the public consultations.
Thank you.
The second item is from Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. On today's agenda is Electoral Area Services Committee item CR2 number 5, which is an application to amend the South Cowichan Community Plan file RZ 1802. The purpose of this report is to present an application to amend the South Cowichan Community Plan and Zoning Bylaw to bring the Villa Area's operations into compliance with the CVRD regulations and to allow further expansion of the resort. In this expansion, there's a change in zoning to allow 17-meter buildings. The Malahat Fire Department was asked for approval and it gave it with conditions. The Malahat Fire Department does not own a ladder truck, just a 24-foot ladder on a standard fire truck. It was stated that the Shawnigan and Mill Bay Fire Departments have proper ladder trucks and they have a mutual aid agreement with the Malahat Fire Department. I spoke with the Shawnigan Fire Chief about the situation, as 17-meter firefighting would be precedent setting for this area. The chief did not know what I was talking about and had not been informed of the change to the zoning, building height, or the application. He suggested he would like to have input into the firefighting design and funds for training his team on multi-story firefighting. The hydrologist report attachment states the existing buildings are not sprinkled and the on-site water supply is not designed to provide firefighting water flows. I contacted the CVRD safety officer and he agreed that this application could be referred back to staff for another look at the firefighting situation for this application. In attachment Q, the applicant is asking for leniency of 2 years in paying the amenities because of the COVID crisis. The CVRD should not allow this, as we still haven't received our amenities for the Elkington Forest rezoning. We also have learned that developers can flip properties and the public usually loses out on watered down amenities. Please amend the application so everyone gets a fair deal.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the third submission this evening is from Susan Kaufman from Satlam. Good evening, Mr. Chair. Contained within the reports of the EASC is the topic of public participation on matters pertaining to the CVRD. Most notably is how local governments may conduct public hearings under the guidance of Ministerial Order number M139. The order also offers guidance on opportunities for the advisory planning commissions to be active again. Noted in the report is the numerous areas of concern from local governments, developers, landowners, and other interested parties. Some are worried about unnecessary delays in applications moving forward, and others are worried their voices may not be heard. We have seen the CVRD move to ensure the public is heard via email submissions for public input and question period, and tonight we will hear from the first delegation under the current restrictions, presumably by electronic means. And the public are grateful for that. It is hoped that the CVRD will consider some modifications to the procedures currently in place, allowing for the public to make submissions via electronic means for public input and question period. Getting a 10-minute break before moving to question period would be very much appreciated. We look forward to the report from CVRD staff on how best to move forward to keep the business of the CVRD flowing. That staff have the opportunity to use or voice their best judgment when it comes to recommending waiving a public hearing and not feel pressure to clear long-standing applications based solely on the length of time they have been in a queue. There may be reasons for the delay. I would ask that while you, as elected officials and your staff, are operating under extraordinary circumstances, so are the people you represent. Let's keep the relationship strong and moving through these uncertain times together. If I may have one more minute of your time to comment on RZ18A02, Villa Erie. I noted in attachment Q the applicant's request a relaxation of the amenity payments of up to 2 years, yet I also noticed in attachment L, part 9.1, the applicant appears to set a time limit of December 31st, 2020 related to covenants on the property. I'm not too sure what this means, but I'm perplexed that they would ask for courtesies while setting firm deadlines during the restrictions of COVID-19, especially on an application of this scale. And that concludes the public input submission.
Great, thank you, Ms. Legault, and thank you for those who gave us input this evening. I believe the next item on our agenda is our delegation, and that's Clay Rietsma, Senior Manager of Development and Engineering Services with the Municipality of North Cowichan, regarding the Joint Utilities Board Sewage Effluent Outfall Relocation Project. And before we go there, Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to recuse myself from this delegation, as I am a councillor on Cowichan Tribes, and they're involved with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff, can you help her, assist her, put her in the Director Toporowski into the waiting room?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Toporowski's been moved and Mr. Rietsma has been admitted to the meeting.
Welcome, Mr. Rietsma. Are you sharing a presentation with us this evening?
Hi, how you doing, folks?
Welcome. And are you sharing a PowerPoint or anything with us this evening?
Yes, that's what I plan on doing.
So if you would like to share your screen to the directors, because once the shared screen is up, you can't see everyone. Is it okay if we hold our questions till the end of the presentation? Maybe just mark them down. And then when the presentation's done and gone off the screen, I'll be able to see everyone and we'll go through speakers. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Reitsma.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to be using a dual screen format here, so hopefully it'll work. It's the first time I've done it. If it doesn't, I'll go back to one screen, so bear with me. Okay, can you see a bunch of slides? Okay. And hopefully all folks see now as a presentation.
Yep.
Excellent.
Not your secret notes.
My goodness, I love technology. This is the first time this has actually worked first go for me. Well, thank you very much for squeezing me into your agenda. I really appreciate you affording me 10 minutes to provide you all with a short update on the status of the Joint Utility Board Sewage Treatment Plant Outfall Relocation Project. And I'm going to try to come under 10 minutes here so that we can leave some time for questions and not slide your agenda, not have to slide your agenda along. So one of the things I wanted to point out here was there's been a lot of work going on over the last few years, and going back as far as the early 2000s, looking at various options for what to do with the JUB outfall. In 2014, 2015, that would be one key point where the CVRD undertook consultation on the Liquid Waste Management Plan amendment, and North Cowichan, City of Duncan supported CVRD in that. There was a fair amount of consultation that happened at that point. And then more recently, we've undertaken, starting in 2017, a Stage 2 EIS, Environmental Impact Study process, which has involved a lot of First Nations consultation. So what I'm going to do with you today is I'm going to limit my discussion on the historical aspects of the project and save most of the time for where we're at and where we're going. So what this slide shows is that you can see that there's a green triangle and a red dot on the map. The work that we did in 2014 and 2015 established the green triangle as the proposed outfall location. And as I said earlier, there was quite a bit of public and First Nations consultation that happened at that time. And as part of that process, we did present as well what work had been done prior to 2014 and 2015, where we did look at other options like going to Quamachin Lake or going to catalyst with raw sewage or even treated effluent. We looked at forest irrigation in the past, and we've also looked at ground disposal. But at the end of the day, what came of that process was that folks felt it was best to relocate the outfall to Cowichan Bay at the location shown by the green triangle. Fast forward to 2017, 2018, we continued, we picked up the project again in earnest, and then we started reaching out to First Nations to confirm that location and begin the undertaking of a Stage 2 environmental impact study to confirm the green triangle location. And what happened as we entered into that process was we learned that First Nations, in fact, wanted to have more information on the proposed outfall location before accepting that location. And so we delayed the process. I was going to hire a design team at that point and do the design and the EIS in concert. but we decided to delay the design. And so for the last 2.5 years, what we've been doing is reaching out to First Nations and consulting with them on the location. And as a result, what happened was, with that plus the removal of some anchorages, we ended up with a better location at the stage 2 location shown on the map, the red dot. As part of the 2017 to current work, so we started in 2017, we have undertaken 2 stage 2 EISs, one for the outfall and one for the route to the outfall within the marine environment. And we've also prepared a receiving environment monitoring program. And the 2 EISs are essentially complete. And we're working through some issues with the receiving environment monitoring program with First Nations. I'm fairly confident at this point that the location's going to work out, but there is still a little bit of work there to do with First Nations in particular to get that location settled down. So moving forward, we're slowly winding down the work associated with the terminus at this point, and we're now focusing more on the how to get there component. And the key takeaway from this slide, I feel, is that this is a very complex process. I mean, the outfall location, locating the outfall at the location that we're talking about is complex enough, but now that we're moving to the routing, and you'll see in the next few slides how complex it is. But aside from the number of options that we're considering, there's also a fair number of considerations in the decision around the routing that we need to consider, including First Nations thoughts on the route, archaeological and cultural impacts that need to be assessed, obviously feedback from the public on the route, because folks will be impacted by the construction, for example, less so by the final product, but more by the construction. Feasibility comes into play, engineering and design, and I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that, but there are some constraints that we have to consider, and those constraints or issues do have cost implications. So this map is just showing the 4 potential marine routes that we've contemplated. You can see that there's 4 entry points. One at the West Can Terminal. The dotted component or dash component is the marine pipe. Another entry point at Hecate Park, another entry point at the end of Sutherland Drive, and another one at Fairbanks and Seaside. The key takeaway here is that there are different risks with these routes. The white and the orange routes through the Marine Pipeline EIS have shown to be less impactful to the environment, whereas the blue and the red routes are more impactful, particularly in these early initial stages of the route where there's some eelgrass beds. So an assessment's been done of that, and a lot of people have seized on the white and the orange routes, but the impacts are relative, and based on what I've seen in the studies, they're not hugely impactful and can be compensated, but they are things that we need to deal with in the coming phases of the work. And there'll be significant environmental work, study work done in the next routing phases of the project. So in terms of the terrestrial pipeline, there are 2 primary options. One goes through the reserve and one goes along the Trans-Canada Highway. And then for each of those 2 primary options, there's 2 marine entry points. So a total of 4 potential routes. So what this map is trying to show you, and I'm going to flip between these 2 slides because the extent of the project is so large, I couldn't fit it on one map and had you be able to read it. But essentially the 2 routes I'm talking about are the red route through reserve, and I just want to say that's very preliminary, and there's a lot of work to be done with Cowichan tribes on that route and what it actually looks like. And then the second key option is the route along the Trans-Canada Highway, which generally avoids the reserve altogether. And I'll just flip to the next map here. And that's the last part of those two routes. And you can see the red one continues through Hecate and the orange one continues to Seaside. Those two routes have these other pieces that come off of them, which is the cyan or light blue and the whites. And so that's the four primary routes that we have. You'll also see there's some green lines on the map, one on Cowichan Bay Road, one on Bench Road, and another one on Cowichan Bay Road past southeast of Cowichan Bay. I call those the connector routes, and depending which way you go, red or orange, you can use the connector routes to combine the red and orange routes together. So all of these are going to be looked at in the next phase of the work. I'm preparing an RFP as we speak to procure professional services for the design of this project, and that'll probably be somewhere in the order of $3.5 to $4.5 million engineering contract. In terms of next steps, I've got a consultant working for me, Judith Cullington and Associates, and with her, Alan Dolan, and the two of them are helping me, have been very helpful in the development of my communications work with the public and First Nations, particularly First Nations, which, as I mentioned earlier, we've been spending the better part of the last 2.5 years working with to try to come to an agreement on the terminus. We hope to continue that consultation with First Nations. There's a lot of work to be done on the marine routing where First Nations has a keen interest in which route we take. And then, of course, through the reserve, there's a lot of work to be done with Cowichan tribes. So our intent, and we've expressed this to First Nations, and there's 6 of them in total that we're working with, that we want to continue to work with them through the design phase and involve them in the decision-making processes as we move forward. There's also some stakeholder engagement and public engagement that we're trying to do during these COVID times. It's a little bit challenging, but we're getting very good at Zoom and Cisco WebEx meetings. And for now, that's the, I guess, primary way of meeting with people, although we do have a communications plan where we'll be posting information on our website and doing mail drops and such. We realize that we need to do some work in Cowichan Bay and along the route for some of these pipelines, and there'll be more to come on that. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that if you go to our website and the address is there, we're posting most of the information on the project on that website. So you can find the Stage 2 EIS reports there. You can find the REMP there. There's some select presentations that I put up there. They're all tweaked a little bit based on the audience, but I put some up there, one on the treatment plant and one on the outfall project in general, and I'll probably add more in the future. And then we have some really handy project update bulletins that are good for handing people just to let them know where we're at in the project. And they're a nice, short and concise way to get an update. So I encourage you all to go to our website and take a look at those documents. And there's also an opportunity there to register with us. And then what happens is when there's significant things that happen or updates that get posted on the website, you register with us, we can send you an email and let you know that there's something there you might want to look at. That's it.
Great, thank you very much. And if you're able to stop sharing the screen, and then I think Ms. Legault informed me that I have Director Yanni DiNardo and Wilson hands up in the participant panel. I can't see that panel because Ms. Legault is managing the meeting. So I have Directors Yanni DiNardo, Wilson, Morrison. Anyone else wish to get on the speakers list right now? Well, I guess I should turn my camera on. Hey. All right, I'll go to Director Yanni DiNardo first for Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Clay. I know we've been talking quite a bit. We were to have a Saanich Inlet Protection Society. There was going to be some communication with Cowichan Bay residents there. And of course, that's not going to happen in this time. And also community meetings that I was going to have. So I just noticed that we were sent a question, and I'm not sure that there is, if you have a chance to answer that or not, but at the beginning of our meeting, there was a consideration about purple pipes, and some people, residents of Cobble Hill, had concerns, or had some interest in that, and I wondered if you had an opinion on that.
Yeah, well, firstly, I did see that information, and so what I'd like to say, I suppose, is that as I explained in the presentation back in 2014, 2015, and even prior to that, that was the time frame at which we were looking at options and deciding what was the best way to go, and a decision was made after looking at several options, including as I mentioned, discharging to Quamachin Lake. There's issues with the lake, and we were trying to think of ways to flush it and using effluent to do that. Sending raw sewage to the mill, sending effluent to the mill. Purple pipe was one that was wasn't really considered, and the reason for that, and my understanding situation with that at the time, was that building code didn't allow for it. With purple pipe, you're essentially running a whole lot of pipe all over the valley to provide purple pipe water to people. And I just don't think we have that kind of water problem in the valley. We looked at irrigation as well, spray irrigation of forest lands and agricultural lands. For a lot of these options as well, we'd have to upgrade the treatment. The treatment's really good as it is right now, and it's certainly good enough to go in the ocean. Matter of fact, if we go to the ocean, the ministry will probably relax our current permit, which is fairly strict. But the idea of going to some of these other options would require a higher level of treatment, tertiary treatment, and trying to get down the BODs and TSSs lower, and UV disinfection for bacteria and stuff like that. I just want to say that having said all that, what we're doing in this project and the way I've designed it, and we have done some preliminary engineering on the pipelines, is that we've deliberately sized, at least preliminarily, the pipelines so that we have the option to build a new treatment plant, a tertiary treatment plant, on a site other than the reserve for the future. And that would be the time when we could take another look more seriously at other options. Last comment on that, on the matter of irrigation and such, not so much purple pipe, but I guess it would apply to purple pipe too, is in the wintertime, this facility sees a lot of water. We're designing out to 110,000 cubic meters a day flow out that plant. And we have too much water in the winter and no need for it. So we're going to have to get rid of it somewhere. And that's where the effluent pipe comes in. It's also and we've had discussions with the ministry about other options, including Quamachin and all the ones I just discussed. And their strong preference is to have an outfall pipe in Cowichan Bay.
Director Leonardo?
Thank you. I just, having it in Cowichan Bay, it's, yeah, understandably, ideas are really good, but we haven't really been communicated a whole lot in Cowichan Bay, and we've talked about that. So it'll become as a surprise to some people. I have put it on my Facebook, and I've been keeping your consultant informed as well. But I just, there are a lot of Cowichan Bay, for instance, 70% farmland. You're going through and past a lot of agricultural land that the biggest complaint that I get as director is the watering 24/7 of the hay field. So if there was a way, that would be great to consider, or establish something, or have it while you're digging in the ground as a future project or something. But I hear that you will be thinking of that later. So it's important to think of all of the things now with the changing times. Thank you.
Yeah, we are considering that. And as I said, nothing we're doing now precludes that in the future. So I want to emphasize that. It's a key consideration in how we're proceeding. But if we do that kind of thing, as I said, we will have to upgrade treatment. But again, that's a possibility in the future.
And Mr. Eastman, just to follow on that, at some point the federal government may require tertiary treatment as a standard, but the pipeline route would then allow you to possibly explore some of those options around agriculture or other things.
That's correct.
Thank you. I have Directors Wilson, then Morrison, then Smith. Director Wilson, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that, Clay, and thanks for using the non-technical language for us less engineering types. I appreciate that. I'm glad to see. Well, actually, let me go backwards a bit. You said that if the pipeline option is chosen, that the government would perhaps relax the current permit if you go to the ocean. That's something that I have to say I wouldn't like to see any of the standards relaxed. And is that something that you would consider going to? And I have a couple of follow-ups, if I can, please, Mr. Chair.
Well, what'll happen is the treatment plan will get registered under right now the treatment plan operates on an operating certificate, and the operating certificate has extremely stringent, has more stringent requirements than the normal municipal waste regulation requirements are. And the reason for that is because of the low flows in the Cowichan River in the summertime, okay? Most treatment plants will end up complying. So I'll just throw some numbers out, but I won't get technical, I promise. We have to meet these two numbers, forget what they're called, but they're 30 and 40, okay? And they're BOD and TSS. So in the legislation, which will be subjected to once you move the outfall, the numbers go to 45, 45, okay? And what will happen is the ministry will take the environment report, the environmental impact study report that we issued. They'll look at that, and based on the recommendations of the expert, they will either agree or not agree and establish limits on this plant. And they're likely, this is just my guess, but it'll be the ministry that will ultimately decide this. They may decide to just apply the numbers that are in the municipal waste regulation. That's kind of their default position. And what I'll say about that is there's two important things about that that I think you need to know. One is that the study that we just did, as high as the JUB lagoon flows are, and we did design for a very high number out into the future, just to be conservative. Even then, at 100 meters beyond the outfall pipe, which is what the ministry calls the initial dilution zone, okay, where the water from the effluent mixes with the ocean water. When they get to the edge of that zone, which is a very tiny circle based on the size of the bay, they can't even detect in the modeling any contaminants. So this is why people, if they can, go to ocean discharges, because, and I'm not saying dilution is the solution here. And what I'm saying is we're taking a highly treated effluent, subject to a very strict permit, and we're putting it in a very big bathtub where you get excellent dilution. That's why you go to those types of locations. Mm. So the amount of permits going to change is going to be minor, but it does have some benefits, and the benefits are not, because we're not going to change the treatment process. I mean, we're still going to treat to the same high level. It just means that we have less chance of going out of compliance, but we hardly go out of compliance anyway. This facility has a 99.99% compliance record. So, but what it does mean is we can then do perhaps, and I'm not going to say this for sure, but there's a possibility of going to capacity reassessment for the facility to free up units, to create more capacity because there's a higher limit. Okay. And so that means that we can alleviate some of the problems around shortages of units in some areas, particularly Cowichan Bay and Cowichan tribes who are going to need units in the future. Those are the two groups served who are running into shortages of units.
You follow up, Director Wilson? Director Wilson, your microphone's off.
Press the wrong button. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's made things a lot clearer. You mentioned the REMP. Can you comment on the extent and the equipment that is going to be covering? For instance, is it a 100-meter area around the outfall? And what equipment are you going to be using? Is it a static equipment, or is it moored buoys with the data coming back from that? How are you actually going to be monitoring that? And on what basis? 24 hours or sampling every 2 weeks or something like that?
I wish I'd brought my marine expert for this, but I'll take a shot at it. It's much more than just 100 meters around the pipe. So we'll do sampling at several locations at 100-meter distance in a circle. So there'll be a 100-meter radius circle around the pipe, and we'll monitor at several locations there. I think there's about 5 of them that we're doing. And then there's a 300-meter circle further out, and we're going to do more sampling there. And then there's a 1,000-meter, 1-kilometer circle that we're also going to monitor. And then at those locations, they're going to monitor the water column, sediments, and tissues. And the purpose of that is, A, to verify what the modeling's telling us, but also, and this came out with our conversation with First Nations, we would have done it anyway, but we changed what we sampled, and we sampled tissues from organisms that First Nations view as resources. They wanted to see what the numbers were in the food sources within the bay. And what was really interesting about the work that the consultant did was, because this discharge existed for 70 years, we were able to sample the sediments right up from the mouth of the bay all the way up to the head of the bay. And the environment there is in the flora and the fauna is actually pretty rich, pretty robust, and the level of contamination is fairly low, which was a good news story. But no, there's much more sampling than just 100 meters around the pipe. And some of the stuff we're trying to work out with First Nations is some of the details around that receiving environment monitoring still need to iron out a little bit.
That's great. So if I'm reading it correctly, then it's a periodic type of sampling as opposed to an ongoing constant?
It's periodic. They'll do 5 days of sampling on 30 days in the summer, and then they'll do another 5 days of sampling 30 days in the winter. They're going to do that in 2020 this year. They're going to probably do it again in 2021. And then we're going to do it again in 2023, 2024, and 2025 after the outfall's installed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. I've got Director Morrison, Smith, Steve. Did I miss anybody else? I've got Director Yanni DiNardo a second time. I'm just mindful of the time, 7:15, and we're still on the delegation. I will go to Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and be brief. Thank you, Mr. Rietsma. It's I don't know what number of your presentations I've seen, how many versions, but well done, and I thank you. 2 quick questions. The new outfall location, I'm sure that when a number of years ago the Cowichan Watershed Board was presented with the notion of could shellfish be consumed from the bay by 2020, we were told that as long as the outfall was in its current location, it wasn't going to happen. And you've moved from the original outfall location to the abatement line. Is that going to have a dramatic impact on that ability for there to be possible consumption of shellfish from Cowichan Bay? And the second question is, I applaud the consultation with First Nations, with local government elected officials, but the receiving environment is essentially Cowichan Bay. Will you be going back to that community in a fairly robust fashion to ensure that the residents living there are fully up to speed on your proposals?
I'll answer the first question first, second question first, if you don't mind. I just want to remind you that we did do consultation through the CVRD, and there was a fair number of meetings held, community meetings held, back in 2014, 2015. So this this shouldn't be a surprise to people. It was out there. It's also in the CVRD Liquid Waste Management Plan done in 1999. So it's in there too. And there would have been consultation with that. But yes, we do intend to go back to the community. It's complicated a little bit with COVID-19 because we were planning on having an open house in Cowichan Bay, and then we would go from there and see how things go. If we needed another one, then we do another one. But yes, we do have a plan to consult with residents, particularly in Cowichan Bay. That was identified as one area, Greater Cowichan Bay, I would argue. And that's one area where we knew we needed to go back to again. So hopefully that answers that question. Regarding shellfish, and I want to be a little bit careful what I say here, because ultimately the decision resides with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Environment Canada through the Canadian Shellfish Sanitary Program. But what I will share with you is some very preliminary high-level discussions around the impact of moving the outfall and shellfish. And don't take this as gospel. It's maybe possible, is by moving the outfall out to the embayment line. I mentioned earlier a 300-meter radius circle. Okay, that would become a shellfish harvesting closure zone, and that's automatic. Environment Canada, DFO, they always put that closure around outfalls. Doesn't matter what your effluent is treated to. Okay, we'll meet the requirements for that. That's what they're going to do. But what they've hinted at is that there may be a possibility to take the closure line that's at the mouth of the bay and move it back into the bay. I don't think they'll ever open the bay itself because there's too much activity there. But industrial runoff, because of the development, all that stuff, marinas. But they've talked about moving it back, and by moving it back, there may be shellfish areas that are currently closed opened up to deparation. But that's a big, big if. And so when we've been talking about this project, what we've always said is that by moving the outfall to the embayment line, it removes one hurdle to opening up the bay. But there are other hurdles. And what we found through the monitoring is that the impact to the bay, although it says on the shellfish closure maps that it's because there's an outfall there. But when we look at the data, there's no evidence that the outfall should be the reason for the closure. In fact, it appears that there's many other reasons that there should be if there was a closure. And we may even question if there should be one. And that's, again, when DFO sees our data, they may say, you know, this bay is in pretty good shape. Who knows?
Thank you. Thank you, Director Morrison. I have Director Smith next, and Director Sebring and Yanni Donato. Director Smith.
Yes, through the chair. I was wondering, Catalyst is always, you know, in the news about the amount of water that they require. Is there any way that the treatment could go that direction for the water, or does it require a different standard of water for that?
The short answer is no. And we investigated that to death with them. And the answer is no. The amount of water they consume, I mean, I know that, as I said, the JUB has a high flow and we don't know what to do with the water in the wintertime, so we need an outfall, and that's true. But it's nowhere near enough to satisfy Catalyst and help them out with their operation anyway. It's not worth it to them. There's also a lot of risk. There's a lot of risk if they do that. They have a very expensive monitoring program for their outfall. All pulp mills do. And as soon as they introduce municipal sewage into their system, which will go out their outfall, it blows that whole program up, complicates things for them. And it would also crack open their permit, which would mean that they would have to go through a review process like I'm doing right now. And that's going to be pretty onerous for a mill, and I don't think they're interested in going there.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
I'll pass, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Director Yanni Donato. Danny DiNardo, you're still muted.
Sorry. My last question I'm just curious about is the COVID. And the question I've been hearing on the news is if we tested at the outfalls, we could find out how many people have actually had it. Is that a possibility, or is the province come to you and it with any of that information or request?
Oh my God, I thought COVID was creeping onto this project in the realm of public consultation. I never thought I'd hear it in terms of the effluent. No, I haven't heard anything about that, and I would imagine that that would be extremely difficult to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, one very quick question here. There's a mention of additional work hang on a second. Yeah, I am unmuted. Of additional work to address the new location, Clay. What additional work is that?
That's mainly around the receiving environment monitoring program. And as I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to work with some First Nations. 3 First Nations have said they're okay with the outfall location, but 3 are still interested in spending a little more time on the ramp to determine what additional sites and parameters they might want to see us monitor. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay, I don't have anyone else on my speakers list. Seeing no further hands, thank you, Mr. Rietsma, for your presentation and all that information. And we would usually clap for you, but thank you very much for taking the time with us tonight. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you soon throughout the region as the project moves forward. So we'll move on now. This is where we got to do a little juggling. Thank you, Mr. Rietsma. Have a great night.
Signing off. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Where we just have to do a little juggling. Ms. Legault, I think you recommended at delegations to move up SR2. So I'm just going to give the directors a moment. We're going to handle SR2 next.
Can we allow Director Toporowski back in, sir?
She is in, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Just checking.
Mr. Chair, I'll also be admitting the auditor at this time.
And the auditor will be presenting the audit results, I believe. Guess I have to get my agenda there too. All right, so here we are with SR2. Does anyone from staff want to introduce this, or should I do my best?
We can let, through the chair, I'll let the auditor, Christine Simpson, speak for us and do a presentation on the financial statements.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And I believe you have a presentation to share with us. Right now you're muted. You were unmuted a second ago.
Good.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to walk through our report that's included in your package, starting on page 78 of the PDF, if that works.
Thank you. And directors, again, because we're going to see a screen share, if we can just hold our questions until the end, it'll help me make sure that you all get your questions in.
So would you like me to share, or somebody else going to share? I can do.
Usually somebody on staff would share. Somebody want to help out?
I could try, do it from my end, and then they can follow.
Thank you.
Is it working?
No.
can see it. I just have to make sure I can see it now, sorry. Okay. You can see the whole report?
No, we can just see partial. Go.
Okay. So I am going just to walk through the process of the audit, where we're at today, and the highlights of the important areas. So on the left-hand side here, status of the audit. We are substantially complete our audit. In order to finalize, we do need to see that the board has approved the statements. At that same time, we get a signed representation letter from management that confirms that they provided all the necessary information to us. And we do have to continually update our subsequent events right until the date of approval being today. That is even more important in this current time as subsequent events are changing daily. So I don't expect any further change to the statements, but we do have to monitor this as part of our final procedures to sign off. And as auditors, we are also required to review the annual report just to ensure it's consistent with the information that we have in the audit process. We were able to complete our audit consistent with the plan that was presented to you on December 11th. Other than we had to incorporate some more subsequent event procedures with respect to COVID to ensure there was no material impact to the statements. On the right there, I will highlight the materiality that we use throughout the audit. For the regional district itself, we use a materiality of $3 million. This is a global figure, overall figure that we use to derive sampling and to accumulate any misstatements during the audit that are found. And as we creep closer to 3 million, we'd be concerned that the statements were materially misstated. But as you can see on the far right there, we report any differences that we find during the audit greater than 150,000 to you. So a fairly low threshold is reported to you. I also wanted to highlight with respect to the hospital district audit that the materiality is 220,000. On the following, I'm going to move on to the following areas. Some of the areas repeat within the report, so if I skip over them, it's because they're discussed further in the report. On page 4, with respect to internal control matters, I do want to remind the board that reviewing internal controls is something we do. We understand those controls, and we may test internal controls if that's the most efficient way to audit, but we do not always review all internal controls, and we don't always rely on internal controls. We may use some standard procedures such as confirmations or subsequent receipts, those types of things. So it's just a reminder that we don't always rely on internal controls. Where we walk through internal controls and we see areas for improvement or efficiencies, we do bring those to your attention, and we'll go through some of those in a few minutes. We have provided an annual letter confirming that BDO is independent from the regional district. I will confirm that that letter is still valid and there's no relationships or assignments that we're performing that put us in concern of independence. On the following page, as mentioned, we will get a representation letter from management confirming that we had access to all the necessary working papers and information. We weren't restricted from receiving any information, as well as we had access to the appropriate staff to have discussions, not only within the finance department, but all the other departments where we may have had questions. And we also have the opportunity, obviously, today to have a discussion in case there's any other further questions that need to be investigated before signing off the audit. We do focus on significant audit estimates during the audit. Those are areas where the accounting policies could be more complicated. The accounting standards may be not as concrete as you would like, and so they are challenges. I do want to confirm that there were no changes in the public sector accounting standards that were applied this year. There was one new standard that was brought out this year with respect to restructuring transactions, but it did not have any application to the district. So no changes in the accounting policies being applied in the statements this year. With respect to fraud, again, this is not the primary focus of our audit. Our primary focus is to ensure that there are no material misstatements in the financial statements, but we do some limited procedures with respect. Sorry?
Sorry, I think somebody was on.
That's fine. Okay, that's fine. We do some limited procedures with respect to fraud, and I do have a responsibility to report to the board any fraud that is discovered. I have nothing to bring to your attention. In return, if the board or management discovers anything that is fraud or potentially fraud, they have a responsibility to bring it to our attention. That gives us the ability to investigate that before signing off on the audit if there is a potential matter. With respect to audit filings, I'll just walk through some of the areas that we pay more particular attention to, either because it's a mandated procedure or because we determine it to be a higher risk of an error or misstatement. The first area being management override of controls. So to the extent you can have a very strong network of internal controls, segregation of duties, and review procedures, there is always a risk that the top level management could make adjustments to the statements to derive a certain result. And often that would be to achieve the budget number. If you had an unexpected surplus, there would be an incentive to defer that surplus so that it could be used in future years. Sometimes a certain segment of the business is not performing, or the regional district is not performing as expected. You might want to try and bury those results. So those are the types of things that we look at any manual journal entries near year end to ensure that they are properly supported and not purely there as to derive an expected result. And so this, I just want to remind everybody that this is not a specific risk for the regional district. It is a mandatory risk that we need to consider, and therefore we cover it off with review of any non-recurring adjustments at year end. On the following page, grant and revenue recognition is probably the most complicated area of the audit for us. The way I like to describe this is that every grant agreement is different. So the requirements from the funders are different. When you receive cash is different. Sometimes you'll receive cash up front and be able to spend it over time. Sometimes you have to incur the expenditures and apply for reimbursement of expenditures. And it's not always clear what you can spend the money on and what sort of expenses are eligible. So every funding agreement is different and complicated and takes time to review. And we really have to spend quite a bit of time making sure that not only is the cash there and received, but was it spent on the appropriate project or appropriate expenditures, and was the revenue recognized in the appropriate period? So it's really around timing of revenue recognition, aligning to when the expenditures were made. The second item there, tangible capital assets. Obviously a significant volume annually for the district. So we do need to monitor those projects, ensure that they are being capitalized properly, making sure those that increase the service potential to the regional district are capitalized, and any costs that are not actually increasing potential are expensed. So sometimes could be some planning or costs that maybe get wasted in the front end of the planning of a project that don't end up having value. So we need to be aware of those. We do sample acquisitions during the year to ensure that they're appropriately capitalized. We did note one item with respect to some contributed land, and I'll go through that in a minute on the following schedule. Staff salaries and benefits. The salaries in themselves are not entirely complicated, but the relative value and volume of the salaries is quite significant for any municipality or the regional district. So we do spend some time on this area. In addition, there are, as you know, multiple sort of facets of benefits that get paid. So we want to make sure that those are all accrued properly. And as mentioned previously, we do want to make sure that the costs and associated benefits are appropriately allocated to the various segments so that you can get effective budget to actual reporting and year-over-year reporting over the different segments. On the second part of that slide, contaminated sites, this is a fairly complex area. It really ties back to the requirement to remediate any contamination. There were several sites in the district that had to be remediated and have been remediated. but there is still some remaining obligation to monitor those sites, and that liability still sits on the regional district statements. And we're just reviewing those estimates each year to make sure nothing's changed, that you have appropriate provisions for the remaining remediation period, and it is appropriately recorded at a discounted value over time. Employee future benefits. This is quite a complicated area in the fact that you will have benefits that employees accrue as they provide services to the district, but those benefits are taken in future periods. So to the extent you accumulate sick days in this, for example, we've actually noted there's almost 11,000 unused sick days available to be carried forward into the future. And the challenge here is that we typically use an actuary to estimate how much of that time will be used, when it will be used, and at what rates, and how it should be discounted. So we had an actuarial report provide information last year that created estimated liability of about 312,000. During fiscal 2019, an actuary was not engaged, so management did do an estimate and adjusted the liability to 238,000 at the end of 2019. Because of the shorter period of time that it was only 1 year estimate and adjustment, and there was no significant activity in there at that point in time, we were able to accept management analysis to get there, but we do recommend that you have an actuarial report done in the future. With respect to cash and investments, I just want to confirm that we did get confirmations for all the balances at year end, so we are satisfied with those figures, but I also do want to highlight that subsequent to year end, obviously the markets have declined fairly substantially. But we have gone back and reviewed those investments and the security of and the fair value of those investments, and we do not believe there's any significant impairment to those amounts. So landfill closure and post-closure liability. Again, here the importance here is that we have to rely on external experts to provide estimates for the liabilities and the associated costs to remediate the landfills and monitor those over time. As auditors, we review all the key assumptions that go into those liabilities, including future costs, discount rates, escalation of costs. So we have reviewed all those assumptions with management, and we're happy with the accounting and the disclosures within the statements. On page 11, I'm just going to highlight that we have no significant deficiencies in internal control. So these would be substantial matters that would require us to change our audit approach, where we expected to rely on internal controls and we were unable to, and therefore had to change our approach. So nothing to report there. Page 12 and 13 are just a list of all the areas that it is required that those charged with governance, being the board tonight, is responsible for understanding and being knowledgeable about when they approve the audit process. So the letter that we provided to you at the planning stage, as well as this letter tonight, cover off all those areas so that you can be comfortable we've provided you with all the necessary information to fulfill your duties. Appendix A includes two audit opinions, one being for the regional district and one being for the hospital district. It clearly states that our opinion is the financial statements do not contain any material misstatements, that the audit's in accordance with Canadian auditing standards, that management is responsible for the preparation of those financial statements. So the actual processes and internal controls and figures and disclosures are all their responsibility. As auditors, we use our judgment to determine the risk areas, the breadth and depth of procedures that we think should be performed to get to this opinion. And by having this presentation, the audit plan, as well as this report tonight, it allows those charged with governance to understand where we put emphasis and matter, and provide input if they felt there were areas that needed more attention. And we are finally required to consider the risk of going concern, and we have reviewed with management the impact of COVID and we do not think that there is any material risks with respect to going concern over the next year. So I'm just going to walk through in terms of adjustments. First off, the top part of the table there is there was one adjusted differences that was noted during the audit. There was fire hall lands which were donated in prior years. I just wanted to highlight that it should have been recorded at a higher amount, 251,000 higher. So we noted that difference. And the second item there, we noted that there were some tipping fees that were recorded as on a net basis, essentially. So there was a presentation difference between the revenues and expenses. So nothing material to bring to your attention. We don't think that any further adjustments are needed to the statement. Overall, a very clean result. So I think you should be happy with the result here. With respect to the hospital district, I'll just highlight that there was one adjustment. It is not clear, but really that is just a presentation between different funds where some capital items were reduced from one fund versus another. So no net impact on the annual surplus, but a presentation change there. Appendix C just goes through changes in accounting standards that are coming forward. I just would like to highlight to the board that both of these standards can be fairly substantial, one being a new revenue standard and one being a new asset retirement obligation standard. They will require fairly substantial work on behalf of management. Just want to bring that to your attention so you're not surprised at the depth of work that will be required to implement these. Appendix D is the representation letter that management will be signing, so I don't plan to go through that. And Appendix E is what we refer to as our management letter, and this is where we bring forward any recommendations for improvements. First off, we bring forward anything that we brought forward last year so that you're aware of the recommendation and whether it's been resolved by management if that was the recommended approach. Last year, we noted some concerns with how a new system was brought in and whether it was run on a parallel process just to ensure that there was no issues upon implementation. And we made some recommendations on better implementation of the new system. We noted that this year management did implement a new system and they did take into account the recommendations we made last year. The second item we noted there is not a formal policy whether or not to capitalize interest on capital projects. We do recommend that management put in a policy in place. We think it's best practice to include the financing costs in the projects. So management is reviewing the internal practice and working on a document around that for their accounting procedures. We did note last year with respect to VADM, the user rights, there's not always a regular review to make sure that those who have access should have access, and whether they've changed positions, they've been moved to the appropriate access rights related to their position. Management has implemented a periodic review of this to ensure that only the appropriate people have the appropriate access. So that has been implemented in the current year. We noted last year there wasn't a formalized process in place to track capital grants in place and where the progress of those. In June of 2019, management adopted a grant management and administration policy to address this issue. And as well, we noted the capital project progress and completion. It is often challenging when you've got large projects and you've got separate teams managing the project and making sure that there is alignment of that communication between the capital team as well as the finance team. So we did recommend a process be put in place to ensure there's periodic monitoring of capital projects with respect to the budget and engagement with the finance team. So that has been put into place. And just a few items for this year. I will note with most of my public sector entities this year, we have had attempts at external fraud where outside parties have tried to change vendor information and or payroll information to access payments. CBRD did have an attempt this year, which was unsuccessful because there were controls in place, but it does raise the issue that it is important to have formalized policies in place. And I would say often when these are successful, it is because staff are trying to be helpful and don't realize that going against implemented policy. So often the training of staff is important as well. But management has implemented a formalized policy regarding vendor change files, just to make sure that there's two people involved and that the fraudsters themselves are not successful in the future if it happens again. In addition, the regional district experienced a malware attack which attempted to encrypt the system, obviously in an attempt to get funds from the regional district. Management and the IT department has subsequently increased their cybersecurity measures and implemented some training and updates for staff, because these are often the result of a staff opening an inappropriate email that puts a virus onto someone's computer. As well, we noted, we walked through the access rights to Perfect Mind technology system, and when we walked through that, we noted that there are some users that had what we call global access rights, and there is a risk that people could be making changes to the system with that. So we do recommend a limit of the number of people who have those types of rights, and management will be reviewing that and ensuring that it's adjusted to the appropriate fit for individuals. Point 4, we have highlighted with many of our larger public sector clients that they implement what we would say is a regulatory reporting and or contract management reporting. I would describe this sort of as a SharePoint document so that all the parties that are involved with different agreements and contracts can all see the appropriate steps that need to be taken, as well as the tracking of those steps. So, for example, in a grant agreement, you may have financial reporting, but you may also have operational reporting. And we just want to make sure that there's clear alignment between all the parties as to what are all the requirements in the agreement, who is doing them, what is the status. And I'll highlight that this is even more important when you have turnover of staff, so it's easy for someone else to pick it up and know what has been done and what needs to be done. Point 5, I don't plan to reiterate. I did mention that I do believe that an actuarial report should be done with respect to the sick leave obligations. It is fairly significant on a gross basis. The net financial number that's recorded in the statements may seem immaterial, but there's a lot of work to get there, and it is fairly specialized work. So I do recommend that for next year. And within the payroll reporting process, we did note in some of our samples some discrepancies between the obligations from a payroll reporting perspective from the financial reports and supporting documentation. So we've discussed this with management, and they are going to implement more regular formal reviews and reconciliations between the finance and payroll reports. And finally, on point 7, with respect to any liabilities, the easiest way as an auditor or a management review to determine that whether anything is missing is to look at a comparative analysis, prior year versus current year. We did note that some of the schedules that we received from management didn't have both years reported. So we do recommend that some of the schedules be adjusted so that internally management has better processes for reviewing and identifying missing obligations, but also as auditors, we have the same tools. So that is all. I apologize for the length of time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. If you're able to just continue sharing the screen.
Yes.
Thank you. And then I'll go to the directors. I've got Director Salmon first. Director Salmon, Wilson, Morrison. Who else have I? That's it so far. Go ahead, Mr. Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the very comprehensive report. Just had a question about the you mentioned the contaminated sites and landfill closure costs. To two questions really. One is the Cobble Hill holding site in Shawnigan included in those calculations? And I don't know if you're able, so it's okay if you're not able to answer the specifics, but broadly, what's the total amount for each of those categories, dollar figure that we have allocated?
I'm gonna look to management because I think I got asked the same question last year, and I think the answer was no on the Cobble Hill. But I'm gonna ask management to confirm that.
Yes, no, it's the ones that we have are Mead Creek, Peerless, Coxsila.
Okay.
Okay.
And
it's 12,000 per annum is what's in the financial statements, is the amount that's going in, and the total liability for gross liability for 2019 is $911,898.
so okay, follow up. Just that's for contaminated, or that's for landfill closure?
That's post closure.
Okay. How much was for contaminated sites?
I will defer to Tracy Bowen on that one.
Through the chair to Director Salmon, there we have no amounts for the contaminated sites as we have none.
Okay.
I apologize. I think I misspoke in my report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that good, Director Salmon? Okay, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more directed at staff rather than Ms. Simpson. Thank you very much for that. That was great. First of all, let me say that thank you to the Finance Department for putting all this stuff out. They're doing a really great job, and I do appreciate the amount of work they put in there. I'm looking at the attachment A of the on the agenda, and on note 27, which is pages 34 and 35 of that report. Not even going to try and get to bring it up there, but if you look at the, this is about the consolidated schedule of segment disclosure, and on page 34, environmental services, they have a total of 7.1 million, which is made up of 3.6 million in operations and maintenance and 3.4 million in wages and benefits. Very good, great. Then if you look at sewer and water utilities, 1.8 million in operations and maintenance and just over 2 million in wages and benefits. Just as good, for a total of 3.8 million. The other one was a total of 7.1 million. That's just background for you. Look at the next column to the left of that, which is Parks and Recreation. Operations and maintenance, 5.4 million. Wages and benefits, 9.9 million. Nearly 10 million in wages and benefits for operations and maintenance of half that amount, for a total of 15.3 million. This means that we're spending nearly 1.5 times more on parks and recreations than environmental, sewers and water combined. Is there something wrong here? Are we missing something along the line about what priorities we've got in place here, that we're spending next to nothing on sewers and environment, and yet we're busy building Disneyland still? This is not on. This is something I'm going to be harping on. I don't want to sound like a broken record.
But that has to the subject matter at hand. We're discussing the audit results. I appreciate that opportunity for you to talk.
Okay, all right, I'll leave it there. I got my dig in, and it will. It ain't ending here. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I will. Sorry, I've lost my place here. Did I miss anybody before? Or okay, I've got Director Morrison, then Hank. And Smith.
Thank you very much, Ms. Simpson. And that was an awful lot of reading this weekend, Monday and Tuesday. And so I'm really quite interested, and it's already been mentioned by Director Salmon in regards to the landfill closure costs. And I was around when that became a really hot item for auditors. And I'm glad to see that we've sort of got ours more or less contained. I'm sure you'd want to know that I actually found a typo, and I couldn't tell you exactly where, but it was in regards to, I believe, the Coxsila landfill and incinerator site, and it had made reference to their, it was the auditors or management's option that no further attention would be required. And I think the word should have been opinion. But just as a general sense from your covering of this and large other local governments, are we in pretty good shape in regards to that overall scenario with our landfills and the work that we've done and the investments that we've made?
I don't think as an auditor we ever want to say pretty good shape, because it's probably just not a proper audit term. And because of the fact that it is so complicated, we do rely on third parties to really get estimates. I would say as an auditor, my risk profile is reduced because the remediation has been done and we're really at a monitoring stage. So I have a lot less concern around where things could go wrong. You're purely looking at approximately 12,000 per year per site for the 3 sites to monitor. So the risk is pretty low at this point for us as an audit perspective.
If I could, and perhaps through to staff on that same question.
There we go. I'm back on. Yeah, looking at that, it's definitely in a positive perspective for me, because it is down to the $12,000 per year, and we're looking at it with the rates and things that we have, with the amounts we have in the reserve fund for remediations. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a lower risk than it could be.
Thank you, Director Haim, and then Director Smith. Director Haim.
Thank you. Just with regards to the landfill closure and post-closure costs as well, Peerless was completed in 2015. Mead Creek was completed in, appears to be 2019. $12,000 a year for each one, but when we look down at the closure and post-closure liability, they're listed as the same for those 2 sites.
Sorry, that it's 12,000 per annum over the remaining monitoring period. So, and I apologize, I think it's 24 years. So it's scaled out for 24 years and then discounted back.
Okay, so even though Peerless was closed, say 4 years earlier, the monitoring period from now forward is the 24
the remaining years. Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't from the date of closure.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith.
Thank you. Through to Ms. Simpson, I was just wondering, is it possible when the documents, the financial statements are done for the municipal long-term debt, that it indicates what the projects are that are going with that, or what that was for? With the electoral areas and all the other loans, they're listed on the long-term debt for each individual, and I'm just would like to see the municipal ones also have what the debt is for, as it's under the whole CVRD.
I'm actually going to push that question to management because they are their statements. So I would say as an auditor, it's not required. It definitely would be a management decision on whether to do that presentation.
I wouldn't see it through the chair to Director Smith. I wouldn't see it as the money is not, it's partially responsible, but the municipalities, there's a very low risk of that debt, and the identification of each one of those debts, they're in those other financial statements. So I wouldn't see it as being part of the regional district's financial statements.
Those are included in the municipal financial statements.
Yeah.
I didn't have any other hands on this, so I do believe we have a recommendation. Ms. Legault, do you want to read the recommendation, or shall I?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is that the audit results and communication report prepared by BDO Canada LLP be received, and that the Cowichan Valley Regional District's 2019 financial statements be approved as presented.
Thank you. Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Staples. I'm going to take some new ones from the gallery. Any further discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? A lot of fancy votes. Thank you very much. That motion passes. Any against? Didn't see any against. None against. Thank you. I want to thank you, Ms. Simpson, BDO, and of course all of our staff team, especially the finance department, because I know how big municipal audits are. I can't even imagine what a regional district audit looks like. I got a good sense of it, obviously, from this reporting, comparing the two. It's a remarkable amount of work. So thank you all very much. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Simpson. And I guess we'll see you sometime later in the year, probably to look at our next engagement, and hopefully a year from now to look at the next audit. And with that, we're going to take just about a 5-minute break to just stretch. So if we're able to take a 5-minute break, I want to remind everybody who's watching that we will have question period at the end. Take the opportunity to email your questions to legislative-services@cbrd.bc.ca, and we will be back at 8:05, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Reports, but before we do, I just want to not really a report from the chair, but just a couple of comments. Obviously, where a lot of us are in the talking of phase 2 and this sort of return of some services, not just in the regional district, but in British Columbia, this phase 2 of our COVID response. I just want to take the opportunity because I think it's being discussed everywhere. Phase 2 is not until after this May long weekend. I know that everybody's feeling the urge to sort of break out. I just want to I really enjoy the buzzwords that Dr. Henry and Minister Dix have come up with. And just to reflect on few faces, big spaces, you know, when we're looking at sort of getting outside of our stay at home, we're talking about doubling our bubble. So from 30% maybe of our exposure to our circle of people to maybe 60%, and just being very mindful of how we interact with people, staying close to home when we can still, and you know, maintaining physical distance, especially when we're interacting with people that are outside our somewhat enlarged bubble. And the final one was, it's in our hands, so wash them. So all of the rules and great advice that we've received over the last couple months still applies, but I know that many of us, especially as we've seen Mother's Day go by, you know, I'm really excited to be able to see my parents and my in-laws, as well as just a few close friends. I know I'm really proud of our 15-year-old. As soon as that announcement came out last week, I received a text message from my son. These are the 6 people that we want to talk to. This is our bubble that we want, and they've all agreed on that. But they're still talking about how they meet up at parks or go for a walk and things like that, rather than maybe piling onto a couch and playing video games all night. And I guess maybe they've had enough of that over the last couple months, but they really want to get out and do some stuff. So I just want to take that opportunity to remind anyone who may be watching and ask all of us to keep that piece up. Keep talking about it if we're on social media. Really encourage people to sort of stretch their legs as we move to that next phase. But we're doing such a great job on Vancouver Island. It would be a shame to celebrate in a way that would lose all that progress that we've gained. We really need to protect it. And those little phrases that we just talked about are really the ways that we can protect the progress that we've made and make sure we don't have a setback that locks us back into our houses over the next several months as we move through COVID. So with that, I will go back to the agenda. I believe Ms. Legault, we're on CR1, and I'll go to Director Yanni DiNardo for the recommendation of the Regional Services meeting of April 22nd, 2020. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regional Services of April 22nd of 2020. Number 1, the Parks and Trails Tree Management Policy be approved. 2, that the budget for Function 121, Economic Development, be amended to 1, add a new project budget to a line item, COVID-19, Business Retention, Expansion, Attraction, and Resilience, and an increase of $30,000 to this new line item. 2, reduce wage expenses by 21,600, and 3, reduce benefit expenses by 8,400. 3, that the tourism couch in 2020 annual work plan and financials be referred to tourism couchin with a request to update the work plan and budget to address the impact of COVID-19. I move those.
Okay, that's been moved, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And opposed, motion carries.
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Yanni Gerardo. And moving on then to CR2, and that is the reports and recommendations from the Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of April 29th, 2020. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Electoral Area Services Committee reports and recommends as follows, and I'll do 1 first, and then we may have to make a slight change in 2 through 6. Item 1, that a grant aid Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $400 be provided to the Shawnigan Residents Association to support digital infrastructure for the community directory in the South Cowichan area. I move that item.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Director Salmon. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And opposed, motion carries. Back to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe on some information from Director Salmon, he would like to pull number 5 for individual discussion from the block.
Thank you.
So with that, Electoral Area Directors only, items 2 through 6 minus number 5. Number 2, that application number ALR 19H01 for 13235 and 13250 Viola Lane for subdivision within the Agricultural Land Reserve be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission with a recommendation for approval. Number 2, that application number ALR 20H01 for PID 005787246 be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission without a recommendation. Number 4, that development permit number DP18D04 for PID 028237765 be issued. And number 6.1, that an amendment to the South Cowichan zoning bylaw for bylaw number 3520 for application number RZ20C01 for PID 003456561 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first reading. 2, that staff work with the applicant regarding the terms of a covenant to address potential impacts related to a craft distillery use, and also that staff develop options to solicit public input, both for further consideration by the committee. 3, that the referrals to Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, Malahat Nation, Cowichan Tribes, Island Health, Mill Bay Fire Department, the RCMP, and the Capital Regional District, as well as internal referrals, be accepted, and I move those items.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, motion carries. Back to Director Morrison for number 5.
Well, I'm instead of reading the whole number 5 out, I believe Director Salmon was hoping that these could be referred back to staff for consideration of amenity contribution designation. Is that correct, Director Salmon?
Yes, there's a staff report already, I believe, in the works. So if this could be referred to back to ESC for next week, just not totally clear on the staff guidance, but are referring the whole thing or just parts of it? We referred all back?
Refer the whole item back, it'll come back. They say there shouldn't be any delay, so I'll move referral.
Okay, second.
Seconded by Director Salmon. I saw staff pop up. Ms. Stroll, did you want to speak to that, or is that okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to suggest that it would be possible to go forward with item number 1 and to refer the remaining items back. However, all of it could come back to your next board meeting pending discussion at the next DASC meeting.
Let's do it all back.
That's been moved and seconded, I believe, already for referral back. Thank you. Any further discussion on the referral? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
That concludes my report of that meeting, and go forward to the, hang on, gotta go to the next one. Electoral Area Services meeting of May the 6th. And using a lot of bandwidth here. Items 1 through 3 for electoral area directors, or no, for all directors. 1, that a grant and aid electoral area C Cobble Hill in the amount of $3,000 be provided to the Shawnigan Cobble Hill Farmers Institute and Agricultural Society to assist in staging the 2020 Cobble Hill Virtual Fair. 2, that a letter be sent to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure requesting the inclusion of transportation cycling infrastructure with future improvements to roadway networks as outlined in Alex Haddad's letter dated March 3rd, 2020 to the May 6th, 2020 Electoral Area Services Committee. 3, that staff develop procedures to guide the conduct of public hearings by means of electronic or other communication facilities in consultation with the Electoral Area Services Committee Chair and legal counsel. 2, that staff investigate the feasibility of holding electronic advisory commission meetings, and I move those items.
By Director Morrison, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, motion carries. Back to you, Director Morrison.
Items 4 through 10. Any directors want any pulled? Seeing none. Electoral area directors only. 4, that development variance permit number DVP 20A01 for PID 005197112 to vary section 4.5 sub 4 of CVRD South Cowichan zoning bylaw 3520/2012 to permit 2 additional plumbing fixtures in an accessory building be issued. 5, that development variance permit DVP 19G03 for PID 003364828 to vary section 5.4.4 of the Cowichan Valley Regional District Electoral Area G Saltaire Gulf Island zoning bylaw number 2524/2005 to reduce the minimum interior side parcel line setback from 3 meters to 0.95 meters, and to reduce the minimum rear parcel line setback from 4.5 meters to 4.28 meters be issued. 6, development variance permit DVP 19I03, PID 026804255 to vary section 5.6.5 of CVRD zoning bylaw 2465/2004 electoral area I Yubo Mead Creek to reduce the minimum front parcel line setback from 7.5 meters to 1.0 meters and the minimum side yard setback from 3 meters to 1.0 meters for an accessory building be issued. 7, that development variance permit DVP 20I03 for PID 028062230 to vary section 3.2.4 of the CVRD zoning bylaw 2465/2004 electoral area I to allow for 1 additional plumbing fixture within an accessory building be issued, subject to registration of a restrictive covenant prohibiting the use of an accessory building as a dwelling. 8, development variance permit, noticing a theme here, number DVP 20I04 for PID 005999405 to vary section 5.12.5 of CVRD zoning bylaw 2465 electoral area I, increase the maximum height for an accessory building from 6 meters to 8.64 meters be issued. 9, that development permit number DP18B14 for PID 026601630 and 026601648 be issued. 2, that the required cash amenity contribution of $30,000 for development permit number DP18B14 be made to the Shawnigan Lake Recreation Specified Area Capital Projects Reserve Fund pursuant to the Electoral Area B zoning bylaw number 985, 1986, section 7.3 sub C sub G, minimum parcel size and amenity requirement for Goldstream Heights. And 10, that staff prepare a report on potential interim amendments to electoral area zoning bylaws to address secondary dwellings in advance of OCP and zoning bylaw harmonization. And I move those items.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on those? Being none, all those in favor? Electoral area directors only, of course. Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
That concludes my 2 reports.
Very much. And the suggestion now from staff was that we move report SR1 up to next because it has, I think it has some impact on the recommendations of PR4. So I believe then we're going to go to Mr. Elzinga, and we have a staff report from General Manager Community Services, the Sport Tourism Grant process. Event process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So yes, we have an interesting year with community events, so we found it important to put a staff report along with the subcommittee report. The staff report obviously outlines that typically we have $30,000 in the budget for community events. We split that in 2 intake periods, one for January to June for $15,000 and one for July 1st to December 31st for another intake. And this report speaks to both timeframes. The COVID-19 situation has obviously caused the postponement or cancellation of many funded events from January to June. And we do have an attachment that outlines the status of those events. The subcommittee met to discuss what was happening January to June, as well as potential applications for July through December. So I would certainly like to thank the subcommittee for their efforts. The subcommittee made a recommendation for the January-June events to allow them to use the funds for up to a 12-month period. Subsequently, I had a conversation with our finance division, who have said that that's in contravention of accounting standards. And they recommended that the time frame be to December 31st. So included in the staff report are a couple of resolutions staff are recommending in lieu of 2.1 and 2.2 in the committee report. Then for the July 1st to December 31st time frame, the committee does have a number of recommendations on events. Obviously, we didn't know at the time whether they were going to go forward. We're hearing more and more that events are difficult through the remainder of 2020, but the 9 applications still feel that there's possibility they could run in this year. Staff recommend again through the finance division that no funding, even if awarded by the board, goes to the organization until the provincial health officer clears the regulations for those events to occur. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Elzinga. So we do have 2 recommendations as part of SR1. Do I want, I guess I'll read those. Or Ms. Legault, did you want to read those recommendations?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation part 1 is that organizations that have received sport tourism event grants for events scheduled between January 1st and June 30th, 2020 be given up to December 31st, 2020 to use the grant funds for a rescheduled postponed event due to the COVID-19 crisis. And 2, that staff recoup funds where possible from organizations that received sport tourism event grants for events that were canceled and unable to be rescheduled in 2020.
Thank you. So I have moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Discussion? Director Sebring, and then
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused here with the last statement we heard from Mr. Elzinga, and forgive me for the lack of clarity here. What I heard him say was that the staff is also recommending that even if organizations have been approved for grant funding, that we withhold the actual checks until we have confirmation that those events are taking place. I don't see that in either of these two bullets in the recommended resolution. I'm just wondering whether we need to craft something to address that, because if we've granted the money for these events between, and I don't know how many there are, I'm not clear on what that is, but if we've granted that money and now all of a sudden we're saying, yeah, but you're not going to get it if you don't hold your event, that's fair enough. But I think procedurally, we might want to make sure that we have a board resolution to that effect, or am I wrong? I'm missing something here.
CR4, that this was a change to impact CR4, but Mr. Elzinga, if you can reiterate that part.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, the two resolutions that are in the staff report speak to events that have already gotten funding, that were awarded funding last November for the January to June timeframe. And those are the ones that we would allow some rescheduling up till December 31st. And if they were unable to be rescheduled, we would be looking to recoup some of the funds. My last statement that Director Sebring was referring to is actually a bit of a prelude to the committee report. If you decided to award additional funding for July through December, it is staff's recommendation that we don't actually allocate the funding until we know for a fact those events can occur through provincial health guidelines.
Okay, fair game. I just want to make sure we haven't allocated any funding yet for that July through December period.
No, Director Sebring, that would be part of the committee report, which comes next.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded. Do we have any further discussion on this? Oh yeah, sorry, Director McGonigal.
That's fine, and that was just for clarification for myself on those that were going from January to June had already been approved in the last uptake of the granting funds. So those funds were expended in the first sports tourism grant, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Elzinga. And those that haven't been expended on those because of cancellation will be recouped.
Elzinga?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, what the policy speaks to is 80% of the grant is given upfront for events to incur expenses for marketing, facility deposits, that sort of thing. So some of that expenditure has been done in good faith, and we would just be recouping what we could from those events that have been awarded some funding from last year.
And just to follow up, if I may, so those funds that were upfronted, 80% perhaps that have already been expended, we are certainly not going to go forward and ask for those funds back from those organizations who have already expended those.
Mr. Chair, the recommendation is that if those events are not rescheduled prior to December 31st, we would be asking for unexpended funds. So if they did expend some, we would not be asking for those funds back. But if they hadn't expended some of the grant funding, we would be asking for that.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And opposed, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Elzinga. We may have you back in just a moment. So go anywhere. I believe then we're back up to CR4. And that is the report and recommendations of the Sport Tourism Grants Event Subcommittee of April 28th, 2020. And Mr. Elzinga, you're back. So you mentioned that would we need to change this resolution to reflect on the direction that was just given in the staff report? Has this direction been amended?
So, Mr. Chair, the recommendation then would be, since you've already dealt with the resolutions under 2, that you would disregard 2.1 and 2.2 of the committee report. There was just that slight wording change to make it December 31st as opposed to a 12-month period. That was the change there. So for the committee report, it would be the recommendation for the board to consider item 1 and then 1 through 9 for each of the individual organizations.
Thank you. Ms. Legault, would you like to read that resolution out for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, that it be recommended that that the following sport tourism event grants totaling $12,000 be approved. 1, CVAX Roadrunners Cowichan Autumn Classic, $1,000. 2, Cowichan Outdoor Volleyball League, Canada Day Volleyball, $500. 3, Cowichan Valley Highland Dance Association, VI Open Premiership, $500. 4, Cowichan Valley Wrestling Club, 16th Annual Cougar Wrestling Invitational, $2,000. 5, Duncan Christian School Provincial Boys A Volleyball Championship, $1,000. 6, Field Hockey BC U18 Girls Regional Tournament, $2,000. 7, South Cowichan Lawn Tennis Club Vancouver Island Grassport Championships, $1,500. 8, Spartans Crazy 8 Softball Team, Spartans Crazy 8 Softball Tournament, $1,000. And 9, Victoria International Cycling Society Burnt Bridge Classic Gravel Fondo, $2,500.
Thank you. I had several hands go up. I had Director Yanni DiNardo first, and Director Smith, and Director Sebring. Was that to move it, or was that to ask questions?
For me, Mr. Chair, it was to move it.
Do we have a seconder, and then I'll go to the questions? Seconded by Director Coons. So then I have Director Smith.
Thank you. I have a few questions for John, or for Mr. Elzinga. Can you let us know who's on the subcommittee for these decisions?
So, Mr. Chair, it is a 5-member subcommittee. It was created as a subcommittee of the Community Services Committee with representation from each of the 5 recreation departments in the region. So there's a representative from Ladysmith, from Cowichan Lake, from the Cowichan Community Center, from Kerry Park, and from North Cowichan Parks and Recreation. So 4 of the members participated. The 1 member of the board is Director Yanni DiNardo.
Okay. And I have a couple of other questions. Where is the Field Hockey BC being held?
I believe that's being held at the Cowichan Sportsplex.
And the one, the Victoria International Cycling Society, is that in the Cowichan Valley?
All events are in the Cowichan Valley, so that particular event is being held in Shawnigan.
Okay, great. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, this goes to the issue I raised earlier. Here we are granting this money to these organizations, and I have absolutely no objection to that. But should there be language in this motion that adds a subject to being subject to these events not being canceled due to COVID-19? I mean, here we are giving them a bunch of money, and we're not making it conditional in any way. We understand at the board it's conditional, but from a process perspective, does there need to be a string or 2 attached to this? I would defer to staff on the question.
Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, staff would certainly welcome the motion.
Or do you want to amend the motion to say that it be recommended this following sport tourism grants totaling $12,000 be approved should they proceed in 2020?
Yeah, something to the effect of that. Subject to confirmation that these events are not being canceled due to COVID-19. That's probably a better way to do it.
We accept that. Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Director Staples. So that would just be to that first line totaling $12,000 be approved, subject to, and sorry, Director Sebring, you said it well, and we want to get the wording right.
Subject to confirmation that these events are not going to be canceled due to COVID-19. Are you good for that? All right.
Seconded by Director Staples. So we'll discuss the amendment. If there's no discussion on the amendment, I'll call the question on the amendment. Seeing no hands, all those in favor? This is on the amendment. Opposed? Unopposed? So on the motion as amended, any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Elzinga. And
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Ms. Legault, I think we've done all the jockeying of the agenda, so then we can just go back to the agenda. agenda, skipping over the items we may have already discussed. So I believe now we're all the way down to SR3. Okay, great. So that's report from Finance Division, re 2019 Statement of Financial Information. We have a recommendation there. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, that the Cowichan Valley Regional District's 2019 Statement of Financial Information be received.
Thank you. We have a mover or a seconder for that. Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Sebring. Discussion. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question through you to staff. Could I have some clarification on two items on the SOFI? There's an item of $765,000 to Fisher Road in 2019, and an item of $65,000 to Pacific Audio Works. Could you? Why are we paying $750,000 to Fisher Road? And then can I have some clarification on Pacific Audio Works as well, please?
I believe the first one is for services for our solid waste division, but I'll put that through staff if we have the appropriate person there.
Through the chair to Director Wilson. I have to get back to you on that. I don't have the exact number or clarification exactly what that is, what makes it up. But yes, it is part of our solid waste facility that we have stuff, but I can get you clarification on that.
Thank you. And then the other one was the $65,000 at Pacific Audio Works.
Again, I'd have to get information on that one too. I don't want to say what it is without actually looking that up for you, but I can get back to you with information.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. And is there any further discussion? Director Salmon.
Thank you. The question on the employee remuneration, there's quite a large variance showing there, about 4.3 million. And the note talks about actual versus accrual, but is that all explained by that, or what else is included in that 4.3 million?
Staff?
A lot of that's in there is also deals with the benefits.
Right.
To do with that are not on the, like, I'm kind of getting lost here. I can get back to you with exactly what, or give you an idea of what's in there.
Okay. Follow up if I could. All right. Is employer pension counted in this, or is that, I see it's listed separately in the employer section to payment to the municipal pension plan, but does that show up in the remuneration figures as well?
Not in the remuneration figures, no.
Okay.
Through the chair to Director Salmon, there would be in the remuneration and employees portion of that, and those type of things are included. But it's only a small amount that you have as remuneration. A lot of that stuff is benefits that we have, and the benefits are added in. So yeah, when you look at the 4 million, that is a timing issue as well as for both the payroll as well as the benefits. And the breakdown of that is quite difficult to do because of the timing, and we do it as a summary posting. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to provide that right to that level of detail that you would want.
Okay. The employer pensions separate.
Yeah.
You're saying, okay. One more if I could.
Go ahead.
Just on the severance, I see one payment, 9.6 months. Past statements used to have a dollar figure for that too. Is that, we're not showing that anymore? Do you know what the dollar figure is?
The dollar figure actually should not be showing in there because that could be subject to negotiations that took place to do with the severance and disclosure information. So to put that information on there could have legal ramifications. So that's why it's not.
Yeah, it used to show, like last year, 70,000.
Yeah,
It's improved.
It's improved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Sorry if I did. Director Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a really minor point. $41.54 that a number of us got. I don't ever remember getting it. It's the only thing I'm claiming for. Can anybody remind me what was that 41.5 marks for?
You know, I ran into this last year, and I don't know if staff can maybe explain. I think it's like a portion of some kind of a event or something you might have gone to. I think under Director Sebring, it shows you having $41 in expenses, right?
Yeah.
And you
never. And I don't remember getting it. Not that I'm going to argue over 41 bucks, but it's the 3 North Cowichan reps that are the $41.54. And I'm going, how did we get that? What is that?
Through the chair to Director Sebring, it's a meal cost.
I'm sorry, it's what?
It's a meal cost.
Oh.
So a meal was broken out between a whole bunch of directors.
All right. All good then. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Has been moved and seconded, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, the motion carries. Moving right along. Sorry? Oh, I thought I heard somebody. Somebody's microphone's still on. Miss Wiener. So we can background discussions if the microphones are left on. I believe we're on SR4, staff report from Finance Division, Recouch and Housing.
And Mr. Chair, prior to you reading that out, I must declare a potential conflict of interest. I'm a director on the board of the Cowichan Lake Elder Care Society, so you can kick me into the lobby.
Thank you. I was about to go to you as soon as I read out the heading. So Director McGonigal has declared his conflict. If we can kick him out, but we'll invite him back shortly. Thank you. He's in the lobby. And we'll go to Ms. Legault for the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is 1, that $25,000 be allocated from the CDRD Housing Trust Fund for the proposed Cowichan Lake Elder Care Society's affordable housing project for seniors, Lake Forest Manor and Lake Cowichan. 2, that $25,000 be allocated from the CDRD Housing Trust Fund for the proposed Duncan Housing Society's affordable housing redevelopment project for seniors in Duncan. 3, that the 2020 budget for Function 498 be amended to increase grant to organization by $50,000 and decrease transfer to housing fund by $50,000.
Thank you. Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Toporowski. Any discussion on those? Director Smith.
So I was just through the staff. Is there a possibility of knowing the update on the CBRD Housing Trust Fund? Because I think in a previous meeting it was allocated into 3 different sections. The 500,000. There was the 265,000 that is for wages and planning, and then the additional 500,000. We were in a meeting earlier that divided it into 3 other portions. Can you just give us an update on that?
When are your microphones still muted?
So, okay, that works a bit better. Through the chair to Director Smith, there's actually 2 portions. There's $250,000 that's allocated each year for operational and administration costs. And then there was $500,000 in the agreement, which was to be put into the Housing Trust Fund. And there was a couple of different projects, but that wasn't determined by amounts for each of those projects. It was just the Housing Trust Fund. So in the report, it states that there was funds to go in this year, and it would be transferring another extra $183,000 of those funds. So approximately there'll be $524,640 remaining in that fund, with the funds from last year as well as the funds from 2020.
And there was funds allocated to the project in Ladysmith?
Yes, 307,000.
And is that taken out of the approximately 500,000?
That's already taken out. It's the 500 and change is still remaining after these allocations.
Okay.
We have 2 years of funding in there because we had funding from last year, which is the first year. So the 500,000 for 2 years minus the Ladysmith, minus these project development funds. And I think that's what you're referring to. So internally, Cowichan Housing Association has allocated part of the 500,000 to what they call project development funds, which I believe these are, to help get the projects to the actual funding stage. So they have those smaller grants, but that's not a CVRD control internally within Cowichan Housing. They take a small amount of the 500,000 each year, set it aside for these sorts of projects to get them funding ready.
So these projects will be projects that are, this is more still in the planning stage. It's not for bricks and mortar. They haven't gotten to that stage. So everything is still in planning. And are they being assisted by the Cowichan Housing Association in their planning? Was that part of what's taking place here?
Mr. Horn just reported this to us. It doesn't feel like that long ago. Kind of explained how that works. I would have to go back to his presentation to understand. They give them some mentorship and some funding to help get these projects to that sort of shovel-ready funding. Thank you. Any further discussion? I believe it's been moved and seconded. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on to SR5, this is just for information. It's the staff report from the Transit Analyst Transit Service Updates.
Mr. Chair, can we move Director McGonigal back in the room?
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking he'd be there. Hi, Director McGonigal.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
I did move too fast, maybe, but we're on SR5 is the staff report from Transit Analyst Transit Service Updates. And you'll see by the 2 letters from BC Transit there, obviously with COVID, there's been some major impacts to transit overall. And after all that fighting I did to get the expansion initiatives moved up, here they are back down the road another year. But I'll go to Mr. Wakeham if you have any information from us. It was for information, or if we have questions, Mr. Wakeham's available. Pretty straightforward one. I don't see any hands for questions, so, oh, sorry, Director Nicholson.
I guess my question is, why would we not go ahead with the Nanaimo planning?
I think based on the letter from BC Transit and discussions that I've had with the other sort of transit champions, I guess I would say from the RDN, it's just that the severe impact of the budgets, Mr. Wakeham, I'm sure can speak to this, really doesn't make it feasible. They're still going to be dealing with the impacts and outcomes over the next year, and funding for expansion would unlikely be available. But Mr. Wakeham, I don't know if you can explain that more clearly than I. Oh, it looks like we just lost him. I got the little yellow exclamation mark on Mr. Wakeham. So without Mr. Wakeham, it's difficult to say.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting kicked out by VPN a couple times. Hopefully it won't distort again. So there's 2 parts here. The effect of the public engagement is just delayed. The plan was to delay the public engagement because obviously we felt the customers had other bigger issues to deal with and to try and fill out surveys. So BC Transit is relooking right now at re-implementing a online survey in the coming months. I don't exactly know where that will be. But the whole initiative to move forward, it looks like right now that unfortunately it would be really challenging to be able to get it done in our hope year, which was going to be September of 2021. It's likely going to be obviously after that. And after the public engagement data is collected, because we're still trying to confirm the number of routes, the starting and ending trips, the destinations, and that really was important to us to get to the public and have those discussions. But once we gather the information, we still have 3 key items to resolve. And one is an ultimate agreement with the RDN. 2 is who's going to operate the service. Would it be an RDN operator? Would it be a CVRD operator? And that ultimately, I think, will boil down to a cost analysis of what it would be on both sides operating it. And then thirdly, the challenge is the bus order. We're looking at ordering a number of buses here. Most bus orders take a minimum 12 months. So without our ability to do the public engagement like we were going to start in March or April, with the intent to hopefully come to an understanding to be able to have an agreement in principle done by early summer so we could order the buses, that's going to be delayed. But what's rather interesting in discussion with BC Transit is there's lots of expansions and bus orders that are in the works that are all going to have to get re-looked at by most regions because of the COVID effect on the budgets. So it's still possible that there could have been some buses that were ordered or sort of on the books, if you will, for up and coming regions that they may choose to try and get out of just because of their budget, their strains. So, and the other part is I understand the RDN is also having their transit meeting tomorrow night, and they're going to give the same update that the staff report does, is that right now the public engagement's on hold for a while, and we're just going to push forward with that. The intent again is when we go through our
lost him. I might contend that I think, oh, he's back.
Sorry, it's really been shoddy the last couple of days with my VPN connection. Anyway, the RDN is also going to have the same discussion. I don't know.
I think we get the intent. Director Nicholson, do we think we understand what he's trying to get across to us, or do we want to try and get him back?
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And somebody from the technical side, if you let Mr. Wakeham know, if you try and do VPN and then do WebEx through the VPN, it's definitely going to be a bandwidth challenge.
Yeah, it doesn't work. I've got my VPN switched off as well.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Wakeham. I think we got the gist of what you were saying, and I think we're good on that. Do we have any further questions? Hopefully not for Mr. Wakeham. Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. Well, there's nothing. This was for information. So let's move on. So I believe then we're on to SR6. So SR6, staff report from the Environmental Services Division, UBO Natural Hazards Risk Assessment Update. Obviously for the electoral area directors, this was discussed at some length, but I wanted to open up the discussion here. It is for information. Obviously there's some work that needs to happen out of this. I will open up the floor to questions through the staff or anything else that may come. Director Kuhn.
Yes, I'm going to try to tread carefully here, because we've had discussions in closed session about that, and I'm going to try to leave that stuff out of what I'm going to read here. So if I transgress, please let me know. This whole exercise, and to start with, I don't want you to repeat what I said at the EAS meeting. It should be well known by now that this whole exercise of the geohazard studies has caused an awful lot of anxiety in Area I, and many of my residents were quite terribly upset because they, especially the ones that were directly affected and that had letters sent to them that they were living in a dangerous area and all this. But I don't want to go into all that again. We did that at EAS. So I'm going to read something here. This whole exercise in geohazard studies has turned into an embarrassment for everybody. Let's start with the Edward Palmer report of 2019. A footnote in the new Stantec report states that the geohazard risk assessment by Edward Palmer appears to be overstated. The hazard appears to be elevated by 2 orders of magnitude from the original 2018 Palmer report. The subsequent assessment risk is predicated on the hazard assessment and appears similarly overstated. It should have occurred to Edgewater that there could have been a mistake they should have seriously questioned the results of their study considering the drastic increase in hazard. At least they should have made staff aware of the difference. I hope that clock doesn't disturb you. Now it's over. Okay, man. Now we've done, we've discussed staff. I feel the drastic increase of hazard should have raised concerns with staff, and questions should have been asked, and I'll leave it at that. The board, I feel, failed in a way that we relied too much on the staff recommendation. We do that now and then with other recommendations, for instance, from the planning department. But I've noticed quite often, we get hung up on small little differences, or small little chips that come up in a recommendation, and we ask all kinds of questions. And here was a report presented that obviously had something wrong with it, and nobody asked questions. And I feel that shouldn't happen again. That there should be a way that we avoid that. And I'm going to make a motion later with regard to that. In the Stantec report at 4.5, there's a section called Future Changes. Ebbotter and Palmer 2019 referenced an assumed order of magnitude increase in the hazard component of the risk equation due to future land use change and or climate change. Both could indeed increase landslide frequencies in the watershed. However, neither are likely to result in landslide frequencies in excess of what was modeled in this study. And that is a very important sentence here. That means even with regard to, so never mind logging, we are not even talking about it, but it says here, due to future land use change, so which includes logging. There is no more disturbance expected than what is already pointed out in that new study. With regard to climate change, modeled results should be resistant to expected future changes. That is a very important sentence too, because what it does, it takes away of what we've been told at the board, that climate change will be making floods and all this from the mountains so much worse. And in here it states, no, it will not have a big difference. So I wanted to point that out because I read these things quite carefully, and it occurred to me that there was a lot of anxiety caused by this whole exercise, and now it seems it was all for nothing. So here we now have the ridiculous situation where we have a winner that nobody wanted to win. Nobody in Yubo wants to have logging taking place in the hills above Yubo for environmental as well as for aesthetic reasons. This report vindicates Mosaic, which is the opposite of what everybody wanted. And this is important. I mean, there was a desire by many people in Yubo. They had a hope that if that study comes out with the hillside, well, maybe it'll be bad enough to prevent any logging. And the Ebbotter report came out with that, and now it's been reversed. So what I'm saying with that is there was a whole circle done. We've come full circle, and with all the studying, we've actually achieved nothing. And And not only that, but now Mosaic is vindicated. And this is a situation that actually nobody wanted. So that's what I wanted to point out. Mr. Chairman, you have some reservation about that.
Oh, no, I just, in all the discussion I'd heard so far, that was a new wrinkle in the discussion about the vindication of Mosaic. So now,
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't told you about that. Yeah.
Now it sounds like you're disappointed in the results that show.
No. Well, I'm in. Well, it's a split, isn't it? I mean, as much as I was very concerned about the airwater report when it came out, and I was concerned for my population, for the people that were affected, there were people who were glad about it. Also living in my community, you know, those are the ones that are totally against logging, and they were, oh well, now there'll be no logging at all. So this has shifted this whole spectrum again. And what I'm saying, we're back to square one. Actually, we're back to before there was any study done. Because
so, if I might, I think that, you know, from your comments at ESC and the comments here, that the entire process is there's concern there, and I think that you've shared that pretty well over the various discussions that have been had. And I think that you rightfully so wanted to have the opportunity to put forward a motion that would do sort of a review of this process that might inform us in the future. And I think that this might be a good time for you to.
Yeah, I've got that motion ready.
Go ahead.
The motion goes that a third party be engaged to conduct a review of the 2018-19 U-boat torrent flow studies and subsequent public hazard notifications to provide recommendations on best practices for reviewing similar issues in the future.
Seconded by Director Hain. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, and okay, I'll go to Director Nicholson, but I would just comment that I appreciate, you know, all of the reflection that you've had on this, and you know, and the process that we went through prior to this starting and where we are today. And like I had said before, I made the commitment to go through the process of connecting with your community around this and dealing with both sides of that issue, and we can do that. And subsequently, we've had hands from Director Nicholson and Director Morrison and Director McGonigal and Director Seabrick. So what we thought was the end of a discussion is just opened a new one. So we'll go to Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I appreciate the motion, and I would just like to make sure that we get solid recommendations coming out of it about process regarding timing of release. And it strikes me that a lot of communication, and it's really important to think about it from a process point of view and not just the technical side of this as well. So I just want to make sure that that's clear in that motion. Thank you.
My understanding was the motion was to process. If before we call the question, though, we can maybe reread it, and if someone feels an amendment's in order, then we can do that. If that's okay for now, then I'd go to Director Morrison, then I have Director McGonigal and Director Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, do any of our staff have any idea as to the approximate cost of a third-party review of this nature, what that might be?
Put that through to staff. I'm not sure if they would report back to us on the cost before actually going out to do an RFP on something like that, but I put that through to Mr. Brothers.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to venture. It's going to depend on the scope of the work. What we would be doing is putting out a solicitation to some potential individuals that could do that work and get a cost estimate. Again, until I've sat down and potentially with the board chair and our staff and sorted out the scope of this, I wouldn't want to offer a cost at this point in time.
Now follow up? No? Okay. And I would presume that if there was, you know, anything outside of the scope of budget, that we would come back to the board for approval on the cost. Yeah, I have you on my list, Director Wilson. Mr. Crothers, could you just comment on that?
Sorry, to come back with a cause. I mean, that would.
Well, we have a budget process. So it's got to come out of some budget, and if we're amending a budget to do this process, wouldn't it require oversight from the board?
If we'll be likely doing it under the environmental services budget, and as the board knows, we have latitude within our existing budgets. If we're not exceeding, if we're able to manage it within our existing budget, we may not have to do a budget amendment. If it was a significant amount of money that was going to compromise another service, we would. And so again, I would like to get a sense of what that's going to cost, and if it was something that was going to require board approval, we would come back. I would like to think that we could manage our budget and fit that work in within our existing budget.
Thank you. I'll go to Director McGonigal, then Sebring, then Will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments were more to the preamble prior to the motion, so I'd best not delve into that. I'll let you deal with the motion, and if permitted, I can speak to the preamble comments if you so desire.
Thank you. I will come back to you after we've dealt with the motion. Director Sebring.
Actually, I'm sort of in the same boat. I want to speak to the communications piece, which doesn't directly deal with this motion, but there's some other steps that need to be taken in this specific instance. I mean, the motion looks to some degree backwards and says, you know, hindsight is 20/20. We understand we messed up and we don't want to do that again. And I appreciate that, but at the same time, we also have some stuff to deal with tonight, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of moving forward. But that can wait until after we deal with the motion. Okay with that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I'll come back to you after Director McGonigal then.
Thank
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the concern over costs of a third-party review, but with all due respect, any cost that is involved there is peanuts compared with the damage that's been done so far to the homeowners in that area. So I'm not really overly concerned with the cost of that particular review when it's done.
Thank you. And so then we can deal with the motion. I see no further hands on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? And opposed. Motion carries. Back to Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Director Kuhn's original opening remarks, I certainly understand the angst and the emotions within the initial report. I think the board moved forward on the best information that was afforded to them at the time with the information within that report. Subsequently, there was some indications of some discrepancies within that. So moving forward on the second report with some additional LiDAR, identified some of the lesser opportunities for failures in that. So to paint the whole board as rubber stamping, for instance, I think if that was the intent, Mr. Kuhn, and I don't wish to put words in your mouth, but I think we made that decision on the best information that was afforded to us by professionals at the time. It may have been lacking under the new report. It does show with the LiDAR the lessening of the risk. And in no way do I minimize the emotions and the angst within the community of Area I. But I think it's fair to say that we did not have malice in the decision that we made in the original report, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, and without getting into a back and forth, you know, I appreciate that, and I'll go to Director Kuhn to sort of respond, but I don't think there was any sort of intent there around anybody's dereliction of duty, whether staff or board, but it was just reflecting on the process with that benefit of 20/20 hindsight, sort of just realizing that maybe there were better reviews and controls we may have done. Right?
And absolutely. And if I may follow, I support totally looking at the process moving forward. And I think that's important to focus on the process and the communication moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Director Kuhn, did I capture it correctly there? Or did you want to have a quick response before I go to Director Seaver?
Yeah, just quickly. Malice is a strong word. That I never indicated that. What I want to point out, though, is it does make you think as a board member on this. It should make you think as well. If we spend a fair amount of time on, let's say, a motion or a proposition that is really quite unimportant, and we do that quite often, and we have all kinds of questions, and here an important decision comes and faces the board, and nobody asks a single question, it does make you think. So I'm going to let that stand in the room. That's it.
Okay, and I will just say that my perception was I don't think that there was not questions asked in this scenario, but I do appreciate what you're saying in the general context. Director Seaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I just to add to that piece of discussion, I said it in closed and I can say it in open because this is something I can say in open. I think we have to assume good faith on the part of everybody, the board members, staff, and the consultant whose report has now been found wanting because we have new information. It's a difficult thing, but where I want to go is what do we do next in this particular situation? I know there was some discussion at EASC about this. How do we now move forward and notify those 34 property owners, however many it is, that for most of them the risk is not as great as was identified in that initial consultant's report, and that in fact things are a lot rosier for them. There are still some landowners there that have rock slide issues, but not to the same degree as you know the overall report initially identified. And I guess that's the discussion I'd like to have next is how do we move forward with this? Is this a case of Director Kuhn as the area director reaching out with support from staff? Is this a case of staff reaching out? I would be hesitant to follow the recommendations in the staff report, which is, well, put it up on the UMO Facebook page, and the people who have to subscribe to the email thing, you know, they'll get notification. After what we put these people through, I think we owe them a little more than that.
There was a discussion at EASC about the urgency of notification, but subsequently there was some conversation between Director Kuhn, myself, and the relevant staff, and I don't know if staff wants to sort of come in and maybe give us a little insight on that. I think the preliminary plan is that staff were putting together sort of the particulars and who and how and what they need to be notified of, and that Director Kuhn and I would collaborate with staff on the best mechanism to do that. Just in the complex times of COVID, it's difficult to meet people in person, but Mr. Carruthers, did you want to give us you know, sort of just a high-level view on what the process will be next?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think you've characterized it very well. Staff have already put together a framework for advising the affected property owners. I think it's important that we talk with yourself and Director Kuhn about how best to deliver that, and also appreciate that it's a fairly complex issue, and I think we need to be following up with direct communication with those individual property owners so that we can specifically answer their questions and wade through some of the technical issues that are associated with this. So I think it's really important that we have that conversation very soon, and we're prepared to work with Director Kuhn and the chair to start expediting our communication with those residents.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, I mean, I'm just looking at the staff report, bottom of page 2, given the discussion of the EASC, no formal communications were released at this time. The following enhancements would be possible: note to community Facebook page, UMO newsletter, e-alert for those who signed up, and a potential webinar to explain the study. Those are all fair enough, but again, based on what these people have gone through, I would hope that the engagement would be as robust as possible. I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm not sure we need a motion to reflect that, but I'm looking at emails that were sent to me before this evening's meeting around that communication piece, and I will make the commitment, at least to the board and to the community members and Director Kuhn and staff to try and support that process. But I see Director Kuhn with his hand up, so go ahead, Director Kuhn.
Yeah, there's another question that comes up, or several actually. For instance, requirements have been inserted now into all of the lower properties that geotech studies would have to be done for any new construction or any extension of a building or anything like that. Now, with that new study, that all falls by the wayside. So we should reverse that whole stipulation, because there's no need for it anymore. Because if
I understood from watching EASC that's why the report was brought to EASC, was to inform the changes to the land use decision policy for that area. But I would put that back over to staff. At least when I was watching EASC, that seemed to be a...
Yeah, I didn't know if everything was in there. And I just wanted to make sure that this is not forgotten.
Yeah.
So if I can, Mr. Chair, without going into a lot of detail, if you recall, following these initial studies being completed, we had brought a fairly extensive process back to the board with regard to risk tolerance policy, particularly in relation to geotechnical hazards, and that policy has been approved. So we're going to have to now apply that policy to the updated report findings and make the appropriate decisions or appropriate recommendations around land use. So that won't be forgotten, and we'll have to update that based on that information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see a need for any kind of a motion out of this. I think the direction is pretty clear to myself, staff, and Director Kuhn to engage with people as expediently as possible, but making sure that we cover all the bases. Like I said, I've received some draft factoids that we need to communicate, and I think that Director Kuhn and I can collaborate on the mechanism to do that in this sort of weird COVID time. And I see Director Kuhn nodding, so I expect we'll connect tomorrow and push this forward as quickly as I can. Of course, being very mindful, especially what we've been through, being very accurate in our conversations, providing what assurances we can, but also not sugarcoating anything. We need to be very clear with people, those that are still maybe impacted, but the larger number that may not be. I don't have anyone else on my speakers list. This was an information item. We did pass the motion to review this, and I appreciate everybody's open-mindedness to looking at this, and I want to thank you all, because obviously I think we're all reflecting on this not being the shiniest, best moment in terms of how we communicate with those that may be at risk in our communities. I do believe then we can move on from item SR6. Now we're into bylaws. Ms. Legault, I believe the bylaws this evening are for electoral area directors only. And so I'll turn that part of the meeting over to you, and we'll go from there. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. BEA 1, that second reading of CVRD bylaw number 4281, Electoral Area E, Couch and Station Sutherland Glenora Zoning Amendment Bylaw, C5 Zone 4450, Trans-Canada Highway 2019 be rescinded. 2, that CVRD bylaw number 4281 be amended by deleting section 2A sub D in its entirety and adding a new section 2A sub D, which reads, D, the following additional requirements apply to the property legally described as Lot 1, Section 3, Range 3, Cowichan District Plan 8512. 1, notwithstanding Section 9.4A, automotive sales and repair, gas bar and restaurants are not permitted uses. 2, a landscape screen at least 4 meters wide, including a fence at least 1.8 meters in height, must be maintained along the northwest and south parcel lines. 3, all parking and loading areas shall be paved with asphalt, concrete, or other suitable impervious material and shall include oil water separators. 3, that CVRD bylaw number 4281 be granted second reading as amended.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Morrison. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. BEA 2, that CVRD bylaw number 4301, West Cowichan Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw, or PID 012490890-2020 be granted first and second reading.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. BEA 3, that's CVRD bylaw number 4302, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls zoning amendment bylaw for PID 012490890-2020 for first and second reading.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And opposed, motion carries. So that means we're through our bylaws and we're moving down to unfinished business, B1. This is report and recommendations from the Director Services Select Committee of March 11th, 2020. And this was brought forward from the March 25th, 2020 regular board meeting. I'll go to move to go to the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation was that electoral area directors' remuneration be increased by $11,167. That reserve funds from function 250 be used to fund the increase in 2020 and the board's reserve fund policy be waived. 3, that the increase take effect October 1st, 2020, and 4, that the 2020 budget be amended by increasing directors' expenditures by $35,000 and increasing transfer from reserves by $35,000.
Thank you. I've seen Director Wilson so far. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My opposing views on this subject are already well known. So I don't intend to go into that in too much detail, but I would like to point out, and I'm sure that Director Sebring can confirm this, that the councillors of the municipality of North Cowichan have voted voluntarily to take a 10% pay cut for the rest of this year while the COVID crisis is going on. I'm pretty certain that the councillors down in the CRD have also done the same thing. They've also voted for a voluntary pay cut, temporary as it may be. And why this board is even considering anything like this, regardless of whether it's COVID or not, is still beyond me.
Just to keep in mind, when we provide direction and a motion was passed, that we have an obligation to bring it back. So I appreciate the comments, but it's here because the board passed a resolution to move it to this timeline. I've got Directors Justice, Sebring, and Kuhn. Director Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is more of a CVRD process question, I suppose. This pay increase would accrue only to area directors, and I understand it that the money that would pay for it doesn't come at all from municipal taxpayers. Assuming this is true, can you explain to me, but probably to the public too, why municipal directors even vote on this? It seems on the surface, at least, that it really has nothing to do with us, or am I missing something?
It doesn't, because it's electoral area budget, but all budget items are voted on by the entire board, whether they are in a budget function that is paid for by municipalities or not. In this case, you're right, the actual increase would not come from municipal tax contributions, but because it's a financial matter, it's voted on by the entire board. All financial.
It was a very valid question, though.
Yeah.
Is it a weighted vote?
I believe as a financial matter, it is a weighted vote. I will go through to Ms. Legault for that. Yeah. The irony is quite palpable because the wage.
It is, yes. It's ridiculous.
Well, you'll have to speak to the government about why they still haven't updated the Local Government Act after the community charter, but that's a whole nother argument. I have Director, if you're good with that, Councillor Justice, I'll go to Director Sebring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my views on this are somewhat well known. I've been getting a lot of pushback on this from folks who don't understand, first of all, that it's for electoral area directors only. You guys want to vote yourself this big pay increase. Well, actually, no, we don't. We municipal directors don't. And in North Cowichan, as we heard from Director Wilson, our council voted to do a 10% pay cut. I had actually proposed 25% for me and 10 for them because the mayor makes more, so a 25% cut would be much bigger for them than it would be for me, but they flattened the curve, so to speak, and said everybody takes 10. That's fair. And when I get the public pushback, I always use the example of Shawnigan versus Ladysmith. Shawnigan has a population that's, you know, comparable to Ladysmith, and it's governed by one individual who has to deal with all the constituent complaints, all the other issues that are covered by a governance board of 7, and those issues are spread out among 7 people in Ladysmith. So yes, there is a case to be made for more money for the electoral area service or the electoral area directors because their job is different. I don't have a problem with that. But what I equally say is this is not the time. And I understand and I acknowledge the last board sort of punted this out to us and said, you guys deal with it. But this is not the time. And I you know, we had a motion on the table last meeting to put this out, I think indefinitely, or I forget what the wording was, and we settled on postponing it to now. I would, and I don't know what the appropriate process is, but I would still like to try again to say, let's reconsider this once we get a better picture of the budgetary impacts of COVID and what we're dealing with for next year. Because yeah, granted, it's not a hit this year. There's a reserve fund to pay for it, but we're also making a budget decision for next year. And there's all kinds of budget decisions that need to be made next year. So if this comes to a vote in its present format, I'll be voting against it. I would prefer that we defer this discussion to the 2021 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Kuhn next and then Director Staples.
Yeah, Director Sebring took the wind out of my sails. That's what I was going to suggest, to refer this to the 2021 budget discussions.
Yeah, a bunch of hands go up. Was that a motion by Director Kuhn and a seconder by a bunch of other directors? Or do we have hands for discussion?
I just wanted to put the motion out there if no one was going to, so.
Well, I believe Director Kuhn essentially just made the motion. I just saw a bunch of hands pop up, so I was asking those, Director Morrison, McGonigal, and Wilson, and Smith. Was that a second? Director Morrison, your hand I saw first.
Well, I think to give staff direction, it should be included in the regular 2021 budget schedule.
That's right.
For whenever it comes up.
Yes. Not all talk over each other, please. I'll come back to you if you want to speak to it. Director Morrison, I wasn't clear on yours. So I understood Director Kuhn saying to forward the discussion to the 2021 budget discussion. Is that what you were saying? Okay, so that's been seconded by Director Morrison, that the discussion of this increase be deferred to the 2021 budget discussion. And that's been seconded. And now I've got Director Staples. I had you on the list. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just wanted to get Director Kuhn the opportunity. Director Staples.
That's okay. I was just going to make the motion, so.
Okay, thank you. And then I have Director Sebring, Acton, McGonigal, Smith. Everybody wants to get their words in. So Director Sebring, you're next.
Just for clarity, because I heard Director Morrison say, well, that just means it goes into the regular budget schedule for 2021. I understand that to mean we're just going to put it in the budget for 2021. We're basically approving it tonight. That is not the intent of this motion, the way I understand it. The intent of this motion is that we will discuss it as part of the 2021 budget, not that we put it into the budget schedule as an item.
I just clarified that before you spoke.
Sorry, I must have missed that. I was a little focused there, but thank you.
Correct. Ms. Legault, can you please clarify the motion that's on the floor?
I've recorded it as the recommendation of the Directors Select Services Committee being postponed to 2021 budget discussions.
All right, so then I have next Director Acton.
Thank you. I was just curious when it would come back, because would we be able to see it with a bunch of directors So like along with our expenses and like would all those line items come together at the same time?
I can't answer that. It would come as an item in our budget discussions. I would have to put that through to finance staff, I believe.
Like, so I guess I'd rather see it as a bigger picture than just this come back as like one small item.
So I think it would be much broader budget discussion.
Yeah, we could bring it back as part of the budget discussions, a report to probably would be starting off with the Electoral Area Services Committee for recommendations, and it would go up through part of the budget process.
Is that good, Director Acton?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Director.
Thank you. I'm okay with the recommendation. I was just inquiring whether it was a referral or just moving it to the budget. Just wanted clarification whether I speak on the propriety of referral or if it is actually.
Sorry, Director McGonigal, I can't hear you. You were just cutting out there.
Is that better?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify whether it was a referral motion and whether I should speak to the propriety on referral if it was moved to the budget discussion.
Yeah, I think it was a motion. I don't think this was considered a referral. It was a motion to discuss this as part of the budget discussion.
Okay, if I may, I just wanted to extend my thanks to the committee that worked on this. I know that it only speaks to electoral area directors, and they are significantly more taxed with a burden than municipal directors, and I've stated all along that they are undercompensated. I just look at the current situation. I think the appropriate motion is on the floor when we look at municipalities and regional districts trying to lessen the impact of tax impacts on the residents. This would be an unopportune time to move forward with this. And I know there is never any good time. So one of the things, or a couple of the things that this process to me has pointed out is the need for an independent review of remuneration outside of the board. So there is some semblance of transparency to the electorate, that it's not the board that's sitting there that is making the decision. And that's not to say that you can't accept, reject, or amend the recommendations of that committee. But I think it shows a semblance of an arm's length transparency where the suggestions of remuneration come from a third party and not from those who are sitting as elected members of the board or municipality per se. And I know there's arguments on both sides. I have utilized in our municipality both directives and have found it more susceptible to the electorate when you do utilize a third party. So I first of all want to thank the committee for their work, and hopefully we can move forward in some direction. Thanks for your levity, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Director Smith, and then Director Acton, and then hopefully can call the question. It's 20 to 10. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. I think the majority of us in these little cubes didn't run for election based on the remuneration. Many of us didn't know what the amount of the remuneration is. And the position for an electoral area director is a full-time position. And the amount of work and effort you have to put in for your community and for all of the CVRD is really important. And we're all sitting here and we need to be proud of what we do and how we work for our communities and for the whole Cowichan Valley Regional District. It's not about whether somebody in another area gave 10% of their approximately 24,000 compared to my 14,000 for electoral area. It's about all the work that we do, and our taxpayers know how hard we work. Majority of them see us out and about all the time. So I'm proud to sit with all of you. It's an honor, and I think that the remuneration, by putting it on to the budget, is the best way that we can go at this time. All our communities are struggling, and we're struggling with them, and our workload has increased with COVID-19. So I look forward to having the discussion in the fall when it comes back to the budget. So I just wanted to make those comments.
Thank you. And Director Acton to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say that for those who didn't know, we have been working on this for a year and a half, and we appreciate what you said, Director McGonigal. But as a board, we decided unanimously we were going to be bold, and we looked at all those other options and felt like that was not an option for us. So, yeah, the timing is really bad. And we'll talk about it again.
I know, and because I went through this, and we did through the UDCM actually used the Ladysmith process as the best practices, didn't make it any easier. Still went to council. It still was reflected on by the community. Unfortunately, doing best practices and having a completely arm's length agreement when it comes back to your table never insulates you from the criticism from your communities. Even though in our case, the committee members included the chair of the Ratepayers Association who made the recommendations, and then when we went to adopt the recommendation, we were still a bunch of greedy people filling our pockets. So I think that Director Acton, because we're on opposite ends of the regional district and we really have very similar communities, I would say in so many ways more challenging issues in an electoral area that size, because you don't have the control over so many things, whether it's around road issues or roadside pathways or all these things that you want to do. And you guys don't have the support that we have at municipalities. We have a whole layer of staff for support. We have each other on council. So it is very, very, very obvious to those of us that are in municipalities how challenging it is as an electoral area director. And I would also say that Cowichan Valley is not your typical rural regional district. Every one of our areas has the population of some, almost it feels like entire regional districts up in the north and stuff. I'm exaggerating, but the level of complexity of the CVRD compared to other regional districts in the province is quite obvious, I think, when you start to engage with other regional districts. So thank you all for your patience and stuff, and especially in such a tough year. So yeah, I don't see any further hands. After getting people to move on, I had to get my 2 cents in. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And opposed, the motion carries. So I believe that brings us to the end of our regular agenda. And I will go to Legault. I believe that we are on question period. So I will remind folks that we're going to likely already have a couple of questions. If they feel they need time to get questions in, now is your time. And as we go through responses to what questions we already have, hopefully have an opportunity to get your questions in. Ms. Legault.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Director Seaver.
Could we just remind people what the email address is so they can send in those questions while we deal with the ones we have here?
legislativeservices@cvrd.bc.ca. And just so all of us are aware, when we go on pause during the break and such, that goes up on the screen to let people know what the email address is as well. It's legislativeservices@cvrd.bc.ca. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one item for question period at this time, and it is from Mary McLennan from Cherry Point Road in Cobble Hill regarding the outfall project in Satellite Channel for the Joint Utilities Board. Good evening. This project concept does not seem to have improved since I attended an open house years ago where they called a break and did not reconvene to answer my outstanding questions. At that time, it was stated that part of the time effluent treatment was secondary, at other times tertiary. From memory, my understanding then was that the change was needed to improve pollution levels in Cowichan Bay and possibly Cowichan River, create greater dilution of residential sewage contaminants, and relocate them in a deeper ocean area. I would like these questions to be referred to the project team, assuming the CVRD board cannot address them. One, I believe it was said during the presentation that the current effluent treatment standards are very high, but that other project alternatives would require higher treatment standards. Can anyone explain that inconsistency?
I think that based on the presentation that was received this evening, as it was just remarked by the questioner, is not necessarily a purview of the CVRD board. There is an engagement process that's expected to go forward. This person could reach out to that engagement process. I would recommend that the earlier presentation reflected on northcowichan.ca/JUB, I believe, is the website address. There's a place to sign up there to get alerts of different engagement opportunities, and that would be the best place to direct those questions.
There are another 4 questions. Would you like me to read them?
Go ahead.
The second one was, has it ever been explained why whatever problem this project is intended to solve could not be addressed by full-time tertiary treatment of effluent?
So I see what you're saying now. There's 4 more questions around the JUB. I would be happy to send an email reply providing the information, or if staff would like to do that. But as it's not a CVRD project, it doesn't make sense for the chair of the CVRD to try to answer those questions.
And there's no further emails on for question period.
Okay, so before we adjourn though, I'll give a couple seconds here, but I want to just say something to the board. I want to thank you all for your good nature in discussing some difficult subjects tonight. Obviously, there's a lot of community concern around things like the issues around UBO, the issues around director remuneration, and really we had a lot of heavy business tonight, and I really appreciate everybody's sort of good humor and common sense when it comes to having discussions and dealing with the challenging stuff that we have to deal with every day. And somebody mentioned it, and I was remiss in not mentioning it, especially during COVID. This kind of meeting, frankly, is maybe not the right language, but it kind of sucks. And whether you believe it or not, I actually miss seeing all of you in person. But I know I thought this was such a great novelty at the beginning, but I know that can't sit in the chairs at home. I'll never complain about the chairs at the board table ever again, because I think my legs are numb, so I won't try and get up from this seat until we've disconnected, so nobody sees me fall on the floor. But I just want to thank you all for your willingness to approach all of this stuff. And Director Smith, I think you said it pretty well in the discussion around the director remuneration. It's a really hard job, especially in the CVRD, especially during COVID. I think that when we revisit discussions around compensation, that I think that this will be the year that people can really show that they're justified in being compensated more fairly for the extreme amount of work that everybody does in their own way. And I'll go back to Ms. Legault to see if any other questions came in, and if not, nothing came in. So I will thank you all once again, ask you for a motion to adjourn. I was going to try and drag it out to 10 o'clock, but everybody's moving adjournment, so it's dealer's choice. I'll take Directors Kuhn and Salmon. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed? We are adjourned. Nice try, Director Topper.
Well done. Good night to everybody.